2023 Fluoroquinolone Antibiotic Awareness and Healing Alliance, FAHA. We came up with that name 4 years ago. That was the first, or 5 years ago, that was the first FAHA conference. And things have transformed a lot over the years, from what the heck is this condition and how do you put together a set of treatments that work together, to now having a very unified paradigm about how to approach this and how to give people the best chance to thrive through the condition. My perspectives have transformed a lot over time, and I'm going to share some of those. This talk is literally one of about 9, or what I'm presenting in the next couple of days are part of about 900 different PowerPoint slides. And it's way too extensive, too much to present to everybody. With it, it's going to be like drinking from a fire hose. And I don't want it to be like that for everybody. I'd like there to be information and then exchange, information, then exchange. I'm going to warn you of something, though. My entire view of this is that healing is a process oriented, or a series of process oriented approaches. The idea of, well, I have Achilles pain, what should I do? Nobody should be answering that question. And that's kind of a simple area of the body. It's just a musculoskeletal tendinous structure. That was one of my biases and why I started the FAHA Facebook group to begin with, is everybody's trying to help each other, but everything is so complex and so interrelated that everybody is going to be essentially causing each other to go kind of on their own wild goose chases. And the streamlined and elegance of the evaluation process has now gotten to the point where we can do this in a much more expedited fashion for everybody. And it doesn't have to be question marks all around. You don't have to wonder, should I be taking this kind of supplement or that kind? We can evaluate and elucidate those questions in a much more personalized fashion. So I want to make sure that everybody has some time to be able to ask questions. Just understand, if you say, I have headaches, or I have arm pain, or I have shoulder pain, this idea that we can work on something and get rid of that, and that affects the overall condition, needs to be entirely alienated. You got to get rid of that thought process, because there are about 6 or 7 underlying significant processes that we can undertake that each have their own subdivisions that will lead to far more significant, meaningful changes. So I'm always going to come back to processes of healing, and I'm going to present some of that early, so we can have an understanding of what those are in common between us. Let's see. I'm going to get my PowerPoint up. Everyone see the PowerPoint now?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And we're going to get rid of the pictures of everyone. Ready, set, slideshow. I am screen sharing. I've forgotten how to get rid of the pictures of everybody.
I wanted to mention that on the image for you, Ron, the wording is clipped off a bit, like the hierarchy, the Y isn't there, and the some of the bottom words are It's
Uh,
cropped poorly.
all right, let's see how it shows up when it projects.
Yeah.
All right. Day one, that's today. Can introduce myself and what I've done, how we're working together as a team, process-oriented evaluation, and a concept I call medical humbleness. Collagen injuries, why this is extremely important, how it's connected to previous injuries, fascia and tensegrity, how do we actually work as a human being? Why we get vascular injuries with fluoroquinolone toxicity, and then floxy neck I'll do together as one presentation between the collagen and the neurologic, because it's pretty much borders both of those two concurrently. We're going to talk about peripheral neuropathy because everybody loves that subject.
Mhm.
GABA receptors, what's happening in the brain, anxiety, sympathetic dysfunction. I'm going to say that sympathetic dysfunction is one of the three most critical things to work on when you're trying to heal fluoroquinolone toxicity. Has anybody else heard that concept before? Since there's just a few of us, I'll do a little interacting. If you don't want to interact, that's fine. It's an extremely important underlying driver of dysfunction. And just really quickly on day two, it'll be all that stuff. So the physiologic aberrations, emotional and energetic healing, which I didn't even start doing any of until about 6 years ago. And then the major syntheses. How do these things all come together to form a unified approach to working on with fluoroquinolone toxicity at the Newtonian, which I call the cellular up to the structural level. And then at the quantum energetic level, how do these things interact with each other? That's pulling in placebo effect, that's pulling in hope, thought processes, even medications affecting at the quantum and energetic level. And then the very last thing may end up being the least popular, or perhaps the most popular subject. How do we thrive through this? How do we use this as a opportunity to be able to learn and grow, become greater versions of ourselves? I'm going to keep that little tab up there so I can check to see if there's anybody in the waiting room from time to time. Welcome, Josh. Just by set of rules, we're going to be doing no talking during the presentation time. I'm going to record the question and answer time separately. So we're just gonna do a little discussion here and then go from there.
Okay.
All right. Who am I? I don't know, some guy in Minnesota. I've been working on fluoroquinolone toxicity for 15 years. I think it's probably a good testament to my degree of masochism. I've not had this condition myself. You guys found me and kept asking me to help. So it's become the template from which I've learned human healing. Far more complex than anything I ever thought that it was going to be. And this condition, in my opinion, is the most complex condition on the planet because of the varied places that it's affecting people, the varied amount of penetration and severity, the comorbidities that go with it and interaffect it, and the fact that it's hitting seemingly a person at every single level, of course, variably. It's very unappreciated as far as its amount of effects on people. It's often misdiagnosed. It's often misnamed for other things. I was given a new discussion point by Evelyn. Instead of fibromyalgia, she talked about having fibromyalgia. I love that. I've never heard that one before after 15 years of doing this. Okay, so the team healing concept began really about 2014, so about 9 years ago. That's when we started to have physical therapy, chiropractic, eventually functional medicine, naturopathic, and then eventually deep emotional parts of healing together with each other. My background is sports medicine, and I had started doing regenerative injections in 2007 with platelet-rich plasma. That's how you guys found me, was everybody in 2008 with the black box warning started to say, okay, this is a tendon problem, a fascia problem. It's a problem of soft tissue. And then I actually had all the patients coming in were teaching me about the neurologic pieces, then the mitochondrial pieces, then the other physiologic pieces, and all of these interrelated webbed connections are stifling. They're amazingly difficult. I'm going to use the Achilles tendon as sort of our example part of the condition to let everybody know how interrelated all of this is. Okay, I talked about this a minute ago. Process orientation. We need to be completely gone, dead and done with the idea that if I have Achilles pain, I need to treat the Achilles. If I have neuropathy pain, I need to treat my nerves. Nothing is that succinct. Outside of somebody walking up to you and shooting you with a gun, that being your diagnosis, and dealing with a gunshot wound, there's nothing that's that direct correlated for fluoroquinolone toxicity. I've done other presentations previously where I represented this as the symptom being the part of the iceberg that's sticking out of the water, and the other 95% are all the contributing factors. And everybody needs to start thinking about this if they want to heal. You can't just assess an Achilles tendon and treat the Achilles tendon thinking you're going to heal the Achilles tendon. It's not possible. It doesn't work because the other 44 factors or whatever it is that are contributing to that pain aren't being assessed, evaluated, and treated. This is where it gets very complicated with mainstream medicine. Because they're fascinated by symptom-based approach. That leads to what I call whack-a-mole approach. You're going to hit this, then you go up here, then you go up there, then you go down there, and you have this very scattered approach to where symptoms are coming from. My contention and my view of this is you assess everything at the front end, understand a coordinated approach for all of the contributing factors as early as and as much as you can from the beginning. We're going to find out a little while with a very complicated slide that even that isn't complete. And I learned that from you guys. You guys are my teachers. Okay, what I call reducing interference and augmenting healing capacities, we're going to talk about in the introduction. And then medical humbleness. All right, here's the team. Let's see, how many years have I been working with this? Dr. Wogan, about 8 years. Shannon Maxner, about 8 years. Paul Nash, about 8 years. Ursula Weltman, about 3. Dawn Emmett Bishop, 7 years. I've been working with myself for consciously about 45 years. Jeremy Bischoff, about 6 or 7 years. Carrie Collett, 7 years. Jonathan Waters, 7 years. Nicole Workman, about 2 years. There have been other people that have been in and out of working with our team. Right now, physiology is handled primarily by Dr. Nash. He's a chiropractor in addition to a naturopath and Chinese medicine. Along with Carrie Collett, who is the registered dietitian with the group. Very hard to get this many Floxy competent individuals anywhere, much less working together as a team. I learned a long time ago that I can't do all of these parts of the equation as much as I want to, and as much as I wanted to feel like I was the guy. And I went through that phase in my career. Like, I'm the fluoroquinolone guy, and that was sort of how I identified myself for a few years until I said, you know what? I can't do hormone therapies as well as somebody who does it every single day. That might be 80% as good as them, but would you go to somebody who said, I'm about 80% as good as, that other guy down the road. Who'd you go to? And I had to give up the concept that that somebody else's healing really had anything to do with me at all. That's how the team started to flourish together. That's been many years now. And we'll talk about that in a little bit more, that concept a little more in medical humbleness. How did I start doing this? I did my sports fellowship in 2006, and we were already talking about the Achilles problems. And even back then, I thought to myself, wow, this is a really smart drug if it knows only to injure the Achilles tendon. You should all be laughing about now. But that was my introduction to it. I started to do platelet-rich plasma in 2007. People just started to come from here and there to do platelet-rich plasma for the Achilles, sometimes fluoroquinolone, sometimes not. Actually, one of the bigger cases was actually a patella tendon, and then a rotator cuff tendon, then an adductor tendon. I started to think to myself, well, this drug isn't just affecting the Achilles. Again, I don't think it's that smart, and it's not. It affects collagen throughout the entire body, and we'll go over more of that in the collagen section, which is actually the longest section of the entire talk for the weekend. The neurologic components came to my conscious attention by a patient who had seen me in 2011, and she sent me 80 articles, not kidding you, 80 articles on what was going on with neurology and fluoroquinolones, based primarily on the fluoride part of the molecule. And I started to add that component. I was working on complex regional pain syndrome at the time as well. That's the most painful condition a human can endure. And my complex regional pain syndrome protocols essentially were absorbed into what I was doing with fluoroquinolone toxicity. I called that Neurologic Healing Day, way back in about 2015. Then I was doing collagen neurologic combinations for many years. The team approach started in about 2016. And I finally started to understand about 2020 that this piecemeal sort of approach, this is a couple years into even FAHA existing, this piecemeal approach to trying to put fires out inside of a human being, where they're all located and how they're all located there, doesn't work. By the same token, only addressing this as a mitochondrial condition, only addressing it as a DNA adduct condition, only addressing it as a neurologic condition or as a collagen condition or as a gut condition, none of them work individually because they all matter. And that's where processes became important. This is not how the mainstream medical system thinks. And even a lot of integrative and alternative providers don't think this way. It was sort of forced upon me. I said, this works partly, but I don't like that it only works some of the time. And we need to be more complete on how we look at a human being right from the beginning and understand as many of the abnormalities and the processes that they're driving towards symptoms as we can, because they're all multifactorial. All right. So here was my up to 2018. This is my where process orientation sort of started, but I didn't know it at the time. I was trying to put together the most complete healing programs that I could. But these are the kind of thought processes that led to process-oriented and results-driven care. You guys can go back and look at this. That was 5 years ago that I put that together. And some of the thought processes still exist here in what I'm doing now, but it's much more individualized, personalized, and complete because it needed to be. All right, second attempt. I called it the healing pyramid. This was more or less a historical understanding that I was developing over the years. on the order of importance of how everything needed to be addressed and assessed. And I changed this PowerPoint, and some of the pieces of it stuck in there. But here's how it ended up. True healing can't be either forced or masked. Meaning, if you're doing everything you need to do to heal, it's going to come forward in new, changes in you and how you feel. But it can't be forced. And I had to learn that. These were my original 5 layers of that thought process. I started up at structure. Way back when I was doing stem cell therapies in 2007, I said, structure. All I need to do is heal tendons, ligaments, capsules, joints, and help cartilage be supported for everyone to heal. And I thought I was just going to be doing really cool ultrasound, fluoroscopic, and arthroscopic guided injections my entire career. That was myself and about 12 other individuals around the country who pretty much created regenerative medicine in the form that it's in right now. I had a problem though. About a third of the people where I was just working on their structure didn't do well. And I could have been happy with my 2/3 of people. And you could build a business forever on just doing structural injections. But I found that a third of those people, the big thing that kept popping up was that their neurology was wonky. And we're gonna see this later on, but this ended up being 6 layers of the equation in and of itself, just the neurology piece of it. Now, roughly about 2/3 of the people are getting better. If I, and another out of those 1/3, 2/3 of them were getting better with adding the neurology. And then popped up the physiology, diet, supplements, minerals, hormones, immune system, neurotransmitters, mitochondrial function. Huge category. This is why functional medicine is incredibly important, because both at the Newtonian and the quantum level, the physiology touches everything. Your body is awash in all of these chemicals that's giving it its overall physiology and its local physiology. Okay. If I just did those 3, we're up to about 85% of people that were getting, really quite a bit better after treatment. And some of me actually thinks, God, I wish I would have stopped there because it's somewhat tangible to the rest of the world, and you could show how all of these things were fitting together. And it was, it was much less challenging. Unfortunately, my mind doesn't rest very well. I'll wake up in the middle of the night thinking about how all these things interrelate with one another. And quantum energy and emotions came up as the next layers. There are, Dr. Sarno is from central United States, I think maybe Missouri, had treated people for a couple of decades from the concept and idea that every physical and neurologic symptom is driven by an emotional insult. And boy, we could have a lot of philosophical discussions about this, everybody. But once 2016 came, the quantum energy and emotions started to become part of the equation for me. I couldn't go back. It's much more complex, interrelated, and difficult than anything else, and I'm for some reason drawn to that. I'm sure that's a character flaw in me, that I'm drawn to those kinds of challenging things. But I love figuring out these really interwoven and difficult challenges. So if Dr. Sarno is right, then these 2 layers, quantum energy and emotion, mean everything to physiology, neurology, and structure. His system actually is used still throughout the entire United States. To be able to, in conjunction with, sometimes actually alone or in conjunction with, be able to help people heal. You're going to get my definition of healing in not too long. Then the thing that really changed everything was my understanding of timing in the equation. When I say timing, you can think about it from 2 different perspectives. The timing of, in that person's life, do they have the energy? Do they have the wherewithal? Do they have the support? Do they have the resources that they need to be able to go through a process of healing? And the other way that you can look at it, more esoteric and spiritual view of it, is this time right in this person's journey of their life to go through a process of healing? And you may be surprised when we talk about this tomorrow, what I've found in this area, both in fluoroquinolone toxicity and otherwise. Because then what I found, I'm going to go through this last section a little quicker because this is the trauma and downstream effects occurring actually is what made me want to go on to my third iteration of how I approach these very complex conditions. Because there's trauma, and eventually we'll get down to harmonized healing, but people are entangled, they have secondary gain, and they need to fulfill the reasons why they're going through this. I will tell people, tell them blue in the face, your experience is not wasted. It's only bad in so much as you experience it as bad. It is your teacher, it is your challenge. It's helping you become a greater version of yourself. And it's sort of like that drill sergeant that you had in boot camp that you hated at the beginning because it hurt. It was difficult. You were driven. You're doing things you didn't want to do. But eventually you learned to love them because that individual, drove kind of what was unnecessary out of you and made you rise to a greater version of yourself. I can't help it, guys. That's how I look at fluoroquinolone toxicity. If the only other way to look at it really is that something in your life was a mistake and it shouldn't have ever happened. And I know it's seductive to think about things that way. But here's what I've found. If you think about it that way, you're going to go around and round and around and around in circles until you get to the point, hopefully, that you understand this was something that was here to help you become more a great version of yourself. And that's a hard pill to swallow, pun intended, talking about fluoroquinolone toxicity. And we're going to talk about that more tomorrow. So what I found was, as people were going through these really challenging reasons why they were having symptoms, there were multiple different things that they were learning along the way. They were learning to surrender to the condition. They were learning about their own self-worth, their own sovereignty, their own neutrality in the world, and then they were learning how to choose joy. That's what was actually helping them get through their life, contracts, agreements, things that they came here to do, and getting them down to harmonized healing. All right, now that's all just a structure, and the reason I embed it all within that yellow is because they're all happening at the same time. Structure helps us understand that there's sort of an order to things, but all these things are working together all the time. So then I came up with the healing circle just a couple of months ago, actually, and it got away from my discussion being about the history of how I learned all of this, and more about how do we deploy it for everybody's good. This is a way that I can teach patients and providers much more effectively. It puts structure right back in the center of the equation. That's important. Why? Because we feel in our structure. We function because of, or don't because of lack of, appropriate structure. This is the playground. This is the testing ground. This is where everything happens. So I put it back into the center of everything and called this the hierarchy of human healing, personalized processes and results-oriented care. Okay, now what you're seeing is far more complete and far more interwoven than what the regular medical system is really capable of handling very good. And it takes 8 or 9 of us to do it really well. Okay, think of that first section as like the cell, and this thing like being the receptor. Like, what activates the cell? We'll just make it a little prettier here. Okay, again, there's that timing thing coming up. If we start from the perspective of, is this the right time in your life to be able to go through a healing process from those 2 perspectives I discussed, that's actually the most effective way to work with somebody. And I ask every person this, is it time? What's your energy like? What's your emotion like? What's your physiology like? What's your neurology like? That order is the most effective order to induce and support a person through a healing process, because they all lead to structural restoration, reformation, regeneration, and improved capacity, which is what everybody wants. You want to be free of the symptoms.
Mhm.
It just so happens that the symptom is just that tip of the iceberg sticking out, and you got to go deep underneath it. Doing that in a really organized approach has taken me 15 years to understand. I think that's because I was probably on the short bus for most of that time, unlearning a lot of the things that I had learned, reordering the things I had learned. Okay, when you get all those things all lined up, sometimes you go on to harmonized healing very quickly. These people think I walk on water. They think I'm brilliant and that I put together the formula for human healing, and those are fun. Those are fun experiences to have with people. When this started in this formula about 3 years ago, that's what everybody was doing. It was very, very consistent that it was getting extremely positive results from very, very complex conditions. Because if you add on top of fluoroquinolone toxicity, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, a little bit of MCAS, a little bit of Lyme, a little bit of Babesia, a little bit of gut dysfunction, that's my average patient. And it's the kind of patient almost nobody wants to work with.
Hmm.
But that kind of patient is who developed this approach. Now, what's nice about this approach is it works for everyone. It's needed for really complex individuals if they want to go through a healing process, but it's a really nice process for anyone. Now, sometimes we went off in right field, though. This started happening about 2.5 years ago. And in that right field, we were just making new discoveries, stuff that we couldn't figure out in those first 6 layers in our initial assessments. And it took us down new roads, and we got to include new ways of being able to heal structure, neurology, physiology, etc. So this ended up helping me to understand that this is a process of discovery. This is a person learning themselves. This is a person becoming the version of themselves that is going to be far more functional, far more interested, engaged, capable, and living in greater degrees of joy. I know it sounds a little highfalutin. I think y'all want that, though.
Mhm.
Okay, but if there's a right field, there's a left field, right? We don't like anything that comes out of left field.
Mhm.
These were really profound challenges that were occurring. And what I learned over time is bringing together all of these different types of inertia of healing all in the same place together in an organized approach. Sometimes, for some reason, ended up pushing people into places that were sort of like their dark, cobwebby, ugly corners of their life. And it's almost like the spirit is understanding that now that we're doing this very complex approach, we can get into some of these very difficult things. And those same people that think I walk on water that went down to harmonized healing first, the people who go on to left field, they think I'm the spawn of Satan, and it's the exact same process. And it helped me to learn that I am just a conduit for somebody else's journey. I'm not here to fix somebody. I don't need that for my esteem. I don't need that for me to be able to sleep well at night. I know what I do is very, very, very high quality. And it helped me to develop that concept of medical humbleness. This is where we were starting to, left field is where we're going through secondary gain traumas, entanglements, and sticking with the process is the only way to get through that. This is going, this isn't putting on your deep boots. This is putting on your waders that go all the way up to your neck. Okay. This is challenging work. And the individuals I had 6 individuals that it just felt like, pardon me, but the shit hit the fan. And I'm like, what is going on with this person? How did this happen? Why did this happen? And it was my early understandings of getting into these very challenging parts of a human being's existence and their life. When I talk to PhD psychologists about this kind of approach, they understand these, getting into these entrapped areas of a human and what it's like to go through that. More often than not, they're projecting toward me and basically saying, you did this to me and you harmed me. Really, that's kind of metaphorically sort of like a doctor being blamed for the pain of having to cut into an abscess and drain the abscess for it to be able to be a healing process. Okay, so the reason why all of these things happen in this order is people were fulfilling their life purposes. What are they doing and why are they doing this here? Admittedly, a much more esoteric and spiritual view of our existence. And you don't have to decide, you don't have to think that that's what you're going through. That's what I've found. That's what I call it. I'm not the first person to call it that, though. And there's those same things: surrendering self-worth, neutrality, sovereignty, choosing joy, and humbleness. And as you can tell, I like my PowerPoint slides and like to put them together in these challenging sort of ways. So here's the tools that we have for that. I think I forgot to put in my slide for medical humbleness, but I've talked about it a bit already. Humbleness is literally a place and space that a human being can occupy with a set of tools, knowledge, understanding to help another person go through their own process of healing. That's what humbleness is. I have a big section of that in the book that I wrote a year ago. That's gotten more expanded since then. And being able to hold space, hold the parameters and the things that are needed for another person to be able to do what they need to do to learn, grow, and become greater versions of themselves has to be done in a neutral state. Like, what I care about can't affect that person. They need to discover what they're needing to go through. If I drive their process because I want them to heal, that actually subverts their process in a way. So that's medical humbleness. So I've now got a 100-point evaluation tool. That's a historical tool that I'm looking to validate as I go forward before and after regenerative procedures and processes with people. That hopefully will end up being something that other providers can use. A really extensive intake form. If any of you ever do my intake form, it takes a couple hours. We now do 4 provider assessments remotely. So it's a dietitian, naturopath, PhD psychologist, and myself to rate everyone in a 12 category, 4-level package approach. How are you going to be able to go through a healing process based on where you are right now? And then a 50-point tracking device. We'll go over that a little more specifically. I'm going to try to not add in too much fluff. I'm just letting you know these things exist. Each of these could be multiple talks. Okay, there's that 50-point tracking tool. All of these things were combinations of evidence-based information in the literature and experience of the providers and regenerative masters. And I found that using it after procedures and tracking people, where are they on their levels of healing? Are they still in the emotional section? Are they still stuck in their traumas and triggers and terrors? Are they starting to develop hope and faith? Are they getting a sense of safety for their own life? Are their beliefs expanding? Are there effects from what's come through them changing? Is their life purpose improving? Their coping mechanisms and transcendence burdens, are all these things starting to expand and become more free? But the structure, it starts at the top: injuries, scars, fascia, adhesions. All of these things play a role in an individual's ability to feel well, have less symptoms, and function. I just happen to be able to put it in these really, really complex things. This is not for a patient, actually. This is for the providers. But this is how we're looking at things from a follow-up standpoint. Okay, I warned you. I'm going to tell you what my definition of healing is, okay? Healing I put two definitions of it in my last book. One was more extensive and symptom based. Then I talked about basically the second definition, or heart-based definition of healing, was anything that helps you become a greater version of your authentic self is healing. And it's very hard to think of fluoroquinolone toxicity being part of your healing and development process. But honestly, it's part of you now. And you can think of it as this horrible thing that happened in your life, and it's going to be that. Or you can think of it as the drill sergeant who you learn to love because it helped you become a much greater version of yourself. There's not a lot of in between there. It takes a long time to transition to something so horrific becoming a good thing in your life. But that is what I'm going to champion, and that's what I'm going to cheerleader. For those of you who don't know, I actually developed that perspective by the time I was in my mid-20s, after having epilepsy for about 15 years, nearly dying 4 or 5 times, having, my knees cut off out from underneath me, hundreds of times with seizures. That's how I developed these perspectives initially. So healing is a consciously embraced process of refining. Okay. It's not just symptom relief. Symptom relief is really not that hard. There's a lot of things I could give you that would make you feel better and have your symptoms be reduced. That's mainstream medicine. Refining yourself through your process of your medical condition is a more complex and complete way of looking at this. And if you want to heal, that's how you need to look at it. That process of refinement is encouraging you to engage your authentic self. Who are you? When you remove the challenges of relationships, traumas, terrors, triggers, who are you? Very few people go on that consciously embraced route of figuring out who they are and really what they're here and meant to do. Those individuals are amazing, shining beacons. Love being with them. And I'm going to encourage you to do that. Understand who you are, why you're here, and who you truly are. Okay? Because you need to do that in a harmonized way to understand your purpose for existence. That's healing. Everything else only helps you feel better through your process. It gives you symptom relief. Everything else is the whack-a-mole system where, okay, I've got some Achilles pain, so I'm gonna go take care of that. I've got some low back pain, I'm gonna go take care of that. I've got some neuropathy, I'm gonna go take care of that. Failing to see that all of these things are all part of the same process, and they're all trying to drive you toward consciously embracing who you truly are and why you're here. That's what a medical condition is meant to do, in my opinion. That's what all other human existence is meant to do. And that's just my opinion. I didn't come to it easily. And putting everything together in such a way that facilitates everybody's process to be able to do this is difficult. It's much easier if I put together concoctions of cells and IVs and a little bit of other things and said, okay, come here and you'll be able to feel better and you'll be able to live the life that you want to live. That's a much easier existence as a physician. I could have done that 10 years ago. Going through this process of facilitating other people's processes of growth and authentication of becoming what they can be, oh, so much more difficult. But that's the rock that I'm cut from. All right. So what is interference? This is what gets in the way of a person's ability to heal. And they can come in any variety. They can be physical, mental, spiritual, energetic, emotional, physiologic, relationship-based. They're all processes that impede your ability to access your fullest self. They're the blockades that you have to jump over in order to wend your way through this life. Now you're going to see it and understand it however you're going to take it in as I go through this talk. All of these things, all of these interference patterns and augmenting abilities to be able to heal are really deeply described for us as a group. Little too much to do as a PowerPoint presentation. I've had people here for 3 weeks and they still want more information on understanding how to go through improving what's interfering with them and augmenting how they can heal. And it's a never-ending journey to be able to go through these things. This is something I'm going to state multiple times through the talks. Feeling like you are betrayed and harmed and your life has been made far more difficult because of fluoroquinolones toxicity is natural, okay? That is how you probably should feel. Be it FDA, drug companies, your physician, the pharmacist, whoever, you should feel betrayed. It should be challenging. It should contend with things that you felt or believed or hoped, things that you wanted for yourself. This is difficult. And I want to say that to you early and often. I know it's extremely difficult and extremely challenging. I'm going to be your cheerleader to take your own highest road to heal the underlying challenges that are happening in these interference patterns. I can't do that alone. That's a big reason why we have the group healing approach. Okay, what helps you access your healing abilities? You guys can read this. I'm not even gonna speak them. These are really beautiful principles. This is how you wend your way through a healing process. And if you have some selfless guidance and support wrapped with some technical skill and ability, you'll learn what these things mean. You'll be able to apply them to bigger parts of your life. And that's how you become a greater version of your authentic self. It's a much bigger undertaking than trying to get rid of some Achilles pain or some neuropathy. And I'm going to tell you, you don't have to go through all of this process, but I'm going to tell you that it's possible. And it is actually what I do pretty much every day. Some of what I'm doing with you is affirming, yes, and recognizing, understanding. I know this is painful. I've seen hundreds of you. And I've seen the gut-wrenching, painful challenges that it's brought to your lives. When you're ready to leave the fact that it's been gut-wrenching, painful, and it's cut you off at the knees, and you want to start to develop some of these things, that's how you begin a healing process that really is going to transform you as a person. There's where I put medical humbleness. My favorite movie is Doctor Strange, by the way, because it's kind of me. I can't quite get sparks to come out of my hands yet or go through portals, but the very, very deeply esoteric and intuitive together with the highly technical is what I've become. And again, you were my teachers to help me develop all of that. This is fun now to be able to address these extremely complex things with you from a full spectrum healing approach. We talked about neutrality a little bit. I can't drive your process. I'm here to open a place where you can learn your process surrounded by a group of people that understand that it's your process with all of the tools and technical abilities to help you through it. I realize this is very different than regular medicine. And perhaps it's meant to be that way. I don't know. It's a very non-judgmental process. You're going to learn and grow and struggle and through kick and scream sometimes through whatever you need to. I'm not here to tell you whether that's good, bad, or otherwise, because it's your process. Okay. Now, deploying arrays of skills and abilities devoted for your benefit. When we do this, how we do this, to what degree we do this, ultimately, I want to be something that's discussed between us. I can guide you and help you through these things. You need to feel it in your own gut. You need to have your own sense of what's right to do, when, and how. If you would have had that, you probably would have never taken a quinolone. So helping you to become more understanding of what you actually have inside of yourself to be able to heal, and the kind of guidance that you can access on your own. It's one of my greatest desires for you to develop. Like I said, I've got maybe about a 3-page discussion about medical humbleness. If you guys want that, let me know. Okay. That's our first break. I'm going to stop sharing for a minute and stop recording.
More of me than I would have liked.
Thank you, Mark. How long since you were fluxed?
I was fluxed in 2007 was the brutal one. I was exposed in 87 to Cipro with a micro reaction that I only recognized in hindsight. Then an Avalox in 2003 with a pretty serious gastrointestinal issues and really anxiety setting in. And then in 2007, I got Cipro in June and Levaquin in August. And that's when I got the blood clots, another really serious reaction.
Okay, how long did it take you through the process to realize and recognize that you were becoming more than what you could have been without fluoroquinolone toxicity?
Okay, well, I didn't even know it was the fluoroquinolones until 3.5 years out. So, and I would say 5 to 7 years before it became obvious that the things I was doing in life and the effect, the connections I was making with other people and the meaning that I was getting out of helping people that had been harmed and stuff were profoundly good. And recognizing that that this is the learning experience and that's really what we're all doing here anyway. So.
Okay, the hard question. If you could go back and never have those 3 episodes of having quinolones, would you stop yourself knowing your life is going to go on an entirely different trajectory?
That's no easy answer there. I would say years ago, it would have been no. I would obviously change this, but I would. That's a tough question. I don't know that I could answer that. But yeah, at least, but just the fact that it's a tough question is at least to some extent an answer to that. So.
Yeah, fluoroquinolone toxicity and otherwise in my workings with really just very deep working with patients in many circumstances, PTSD, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, craniocervical instability, complex regional pain syndrome, the kinds of things that the physicians don't want to deal with because it's extremely convoluted, very hard. The important point, not the important point, the critical point, if we're going to progress forward in life and not be caught by what is anchoring us from the back, is to get to that point of saying, I'm glad this happened. I would have never chosen it, but I'm glad for what it created in me. That's when you start looking forward into your future and enjoying your moment rather than being angry about what was.
Yeah, I definitely crossed that threshold. But yeah, I mean, again, it's not absolute and binary that, okay, now I'm totally awesome and on board and up with this in all times and all, it's like sometimes the pain
Yeah.
is pretty intense and it's like, maybe this isn't really what, it's brutal at times and still is, it's not looking at what happened, but I mean,
Well, this is where we Shrek it. You know what I mean by that, right?
No, actually, I don't watch movies, so I know he's a character, but I don't. I'm a kind of a strange person. I've never had a television. I've never rented or streamed a movie. I don't have a cell phone. I'm a,
Also, hanging out on a streaming presentation with me is kind of a privilege. Thank you.
it is
Doesn't sound
actually
like you do
very
very
unique.
much.
No, yeah, I'm not a digital guy at all. So I'm trying to do this digital day for this thing, and I was like, I have no idea what I'm doing.
Okay. So having, somebody's, voice of wisdom that's gone through the challenges, and you can see the carnage behind you, but see kind of the light in front of you. That's what that's what I try to help people move toward. And yep, I've got a lot of healing capacity in myself and those other 9 providers to be able to help that process. I from the perspective of your 2010 self, what do you think it would have been like to have gone through a very deeply process oriented healing paradigm compared to the whack-a-mole?
Yeah, well, for me, it was with even out any much guidance, it was, there was like 150 people in the entire community on Facebook when I figured out what had happened, and we were just okay, magnesium, and then there was like the Flox report, and a few things, and other people like that thing sucks, it's inaccurate, and there was just so little information. We were basically figuring it out ourselves, and it was whack-a-mole, but there was really no one guiding us, and yeah, obviously it would have been it would have been nice to encounter you then with the knowledge you have now. And but that's not how things went. But
I can say I'm very thankful for guys like Dr. Cohen.
yeah, he definitely stood up and when it's never been acceptable for a doctor to step up and say that pharmaceutical products are harming people and above and beyond set up a protocol to help them and stuff. So yeah.
Well, we learned in the last 3.5 years how unpopular that is with mainstream medicine to be told they may not be quite right.
Yeah, we've stepped into a new threat, another order of magnitude of oppression or tyranny or whatever, but tyranny is really the word.
Okay, everyone else, thoughts on process-oriented care?
Question, Alex here. Dr. Hansen, my question is, what is your current understanding of what keeps this condition going or self-sustaining months and years after the original insult? So I'm myself over about 3.5 years from the original injury, and I have the evidence of substantial secondary mitochondrial dysfunction, in addition to all the other musculoskeletal and neurological symptoms. And it's 3 years after, and it's not clear, and I see it as a symptom rather than the root cause. The mitochondrial dysfunction is yet another symptom in the form of reduced mitochondrial DNA content, low ATP production, elevated oxidative stress. So the question is, what is your present understanding of what keeps this condition going and how that feeds into the healing framework?
Well, have you ever seen rows of dominoes that, one domino knocks over 3, and they go off into different directions?
Yes, sure. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to say that, the quinolone piece is going to have its own 3 dominoes, and the fluoride piece is going to have its 3 dominoes, and a couple of those dominoes kind of coalesce into the same pathways. DNA adducts Jersey has talked at previous FAHA conferences. It's hard to get more fundamental than that. Mitochondrial damage, sympathetic nervous system dysfunction, and emotional insults, dysregulation, and gut biome. Those are probably, there's some overlap between each of those three things coming out of each other, but those 3 or 4 things combined are going to be they're going to knock over their own sets of dominoes. And then those are going to knock over their own sets of dominoes. So, but to get the most fundamental, it's those 5 things. And the more that you can work on those 5 things in coordination with one another, the better the chance that you're going to have meaningful transformation long term. And then you'll get to my bias on floxy neck, that's musculoskeletal neurologically, that's the most important thing to work on. We'll talk about that in a little while later today. But ultimately, it's not just what are the fundamental things, it's what order are you assessing them, addressing them, and putting them together. Because I can give you 22 different supplements that affect mitochondria, all those sites of which are affected by potentially by fluoroquinolones. What order are you taking them in? What dose are you taking them in? It's not as simple as just figuring out what somebody needs. It's how do you administer those things? And it's different potentially for everybody based on their genetics and their mitochondrial function and their downstream effects that are otherwise affecting things. So that's a good question, but a hard question. I'll say, then I'll stick to those 5 off the top of my head. You got DNA, mitochondria, sympathetic nervous system, which that's a good adjunct for floxy neck, actually. Then you've got gut health, and yeah, I'd say those are your most fundamental things to get down to. And then everything else is, big arborized sort of effects of all of those things going outward. Deep emotional was the 5th one. Deep emotional insults.
I get it. It though almost looks like your cells are stuck in some sort of upregulated state of fight, or some call it cell danger response, and they're stuck in the state, and it's not clear why they're still stuck in that state. What keeps this going?
There are a lot of reasons for that, and I didn't come to this knowledge and understanding easily, but I was going to do this with you tomorrow, but I'll do this with you now. Everybody do this with your pointer finger. Okay, now go like this. I hope everybody's fingers stopped and didn't go through their head. But why does the finger stop? Everyone should be saying, because we're physical beings, it's mass, it's matter that's stopping it. Okay. Your finger and your forehead are both 99.99999% free space. That's every human, not just the blondes. Only the blondes get mad at me for that one. So at our basic level of organization, we're not physical. The only reason that finger repels and the forehead repel each other is because tissues, cells themselves and tissues are electromagnetic. We are big bags of electromagnetism held together by consciousness. Held together, organized, and given meaning by consciousness. We're not physical beings. Why does this matter? If I don't understand that that's how you're organized, I leave a lot on the table for what I could otherwise help you do, or guide you to do what you need to do in your next best steps. But more importantly, it puts you in the driver's seat. If you really want to understand that concept, read You Are the Placebo by Joe Dispenza. The cumulative force and power of your heart, mind, and spirit on your body is far more powerful than anything that I or any other physician could do, both to the good and to the negative. Meaning your reaction to your challenges is far more important than the fact that you had a challenge. And you understanding that and owning that gives you the opportunity to be able to go through healing processes that nobody else could take you. It could make, inflict upon you, let's say. Like, I can't make somebody heal. I need you to understand that you are your own source of healing. And helping somebody down that pathway and through that kind of the mental and emotional challenges and blocks to be able to understand that is a very, very big piece of the equation. First chapter in the book that I wrote is You Are Your Own Healer. Second chapter is Everything Can Heal. Realizing the energetic and the energetic, magnetic, electrical effect that you have just in your thoughts and your feelings has more effect than any drug you could ever take. Does that sound heretical enough? All right, I'm gonna revisit that concept more than once, because it took more than 10 years of working on fluoroquinolone toxicity before I said a person can't heal without first deciding that they have the ability to heal. Can't happen. And I can't do anything other than be your cheerleader for you to embrace that concept. That can't be forced on you. You have to choose to believe that. In fact, though, that's the only reason any medical approach or otherwise has any effect on anyone. You're borrowing your placebo effect to that physician that's treating you. And that's where the sense of betrayal of something bad or challenging happening can be very difficult. It really didn't have anything to do with the physician. It was your time to have a challenge in your life. Again, a more spiritual view of this, but that's the way it always works out in the individuals that have gone through really extensive healing processes. So I'm just letting you know how I've gotten it by working with them. How's that, Alex?
Yeah, I appreciate that perspective. I think I do believe that mindset component is critical to shift the cells from that state of chronic cell danger response. And
Yeah, healing can't happen without it. One of the things I've learned to do as a physician over time, and previous to that as a patient with epilepsy, is surrendering to the process. I can't impose what I want on that process without mucking it up. What does that process want me to go through? And then wrapping all of that in really, really highly skilled, technical, but heart-based ways of doing things with people. That's how you go through the healing process. And not everybody's ready to do that. So some people just want me to do really high quality cellular injections to help them through their process, wherever they are in that journey. And that's fine too. I need to present it with all of the possibilities coming forward together, so that people can kind of line up at the buffet and decide what they want to do and when they want to do it and how they want to do it. And that's the way that it should be. I shouldn't be able to, I'm choosing to not run a practice where I say, you have to go through this 3-week program because it is the most efficacious. No, you're going to decide what's most efficacious for you based on what I'm describing to you and what we're presenting to you. I want you to have that confidence and that level of discernment for yourself. Again, if you would have had that before you took the quinolone, you probably wouldn't have taken the quinolone. So let's learn that as part of your healing process. All right, let's take about 15 minutes and then we'll start in on collagen. I decided to do collagen first, partly because that was one of the first areas that was starting to be noticed as far as abnormalities that were happening with people from fluoroquinolones. And the first black box warning for Achilles rupture. From there, though, there's a lot that collagen touches for obvious reasons. We're going to go over some of those. We'll get a little bit more deep into the biochemistry, the structure, the function, what happens with collagen with fluoroquinolones, because it sets the basis up for some of the other abnormalities, both separately and in conjunction with each other. So collagen. Okay. How is it made in the body? What is it? Goes through separate changes, separate stages. You get gene expression in the nucleus, the translational and events, intracellular steps to create these different molecules occur. And then there are different things that happen in the extracellular matrix to modify the collagen and prepare it to be used in the tissues. In the extracellular, you're removing certain peptides, you're assembling the collagen into its micro and macro structures. And then there's cross-linking that occurs to actually create the tensile strength of the collagen. Glycine, I hope everybody is taking some glycine. It's one of the areas where cross-linking and connection can occur. A lot of proline and hydroxyproline also critical supplements for people to take. All collagens are composed of these 3 polypeptide chains that are coiled around each other to form a triple helix. Just to understand why, take some 6-pound test line, fishing line, and try to pull apart one piece of it versus 3 pieces that are wound together. It's kind of an easy way to understand why there are 3 different bands and why those bands coiled together are actually have more tensile strength than just 1 band or 3 bands that are side by side. Okay, there's that triple helix. It's starting to show you some of the hydrogen bonding that occurs between the 3 of them. That's because of the amino acids that are available there to be able to help do that. And then just so you understand how complex these structures are, when I'm looking under ultrasound, I'm seeing these tertiary bundles called macro bundles under ultrasound, and not all the way down to the fibril or the fiber, secondary fibers, primary bundles. Another way of looking at this a little bit more in view, I'm seeing this collagen fiber, which goes down to, or I'm sorry, 1 back from that, but it goes all the way down to this triple helix. It's very, very complicated. It's very powerful, very strong tensile strength. Just an idea where there are actually 19 different kinds of collagen, and they're formed in different places for different rigidity and type of function. It's important that we actually have the ability to degrade our collagen too. Sometimes that's because there are scars and adhesions that shouldn't be there, but your collagen is a reflection of the fact that your rest of your body's alive and it's constantly redoing itself to meet the demands that your body is giving it. And if that process is interrupted, which we're going to talk about, your collagen will not be as functional as it otherwise could be. The way I like to describe this is our bone is very alive as well. And the deposition of bone spicules inside of the microstructure of a bone is created essentially by osteoclasts and osteoblasts. Well, the osteoclasts take away bone that's not being used the way that it needs to be based on your stress patterns, and your osteoblasts form new bone based on the stress patterns that you're giving the body. Extremely functional, dynamic, plastic, changing sort of environment, and the body's using mineral metalloproteases and proteinases to be able to allow that to happen. Sometimes you got to take away, and sometimes you got to give. Sometimes you got to build new structure. So this osteoclast, osteoblast metaphor, it's a little easier to consider that your bone is changing all the time for most people than it is that your tendons and ligaments are changing all the time, but they're very alive. They're very functional. So I put this inflammation one in. It was based on gingivitis originally, but abnormal inflammation in the body will get in the way of these processes. And the big one we're going to talk about is neurogenic inflammation, but that's one of 10 different kinds of abnormal physiologic processes that have different names of inflammation. You can't just say inflammation and say it's a bad thing. In fact, acute traumatic inflammation is a good thing. You would not be able to heal without acute traumatic inflammation. That's what happens, when you sprain an ankle. Stopping that kind of inflammation is actually bad for your healing process. Yes, ice and anti-inflammatories are bad for your healing process. The rest of you guys shouldn't like anti-inflammatories anyway, but because it stops your ability to heal and you end up being far more symptomatic. So those 10 forms of inflammation, we may be able to go over them at some point in time because it guides a lot of the physiologic care. So here's that important crossover point. 10 different kinds of inflammation in the body. Neurogenic inflammation. Here's where I start to weave things together a little bit. We'll do a lot more of that tomorrow. So neurogenic inflammation comes from sick nerves. And sympathetic dysfunction is one of those types of sick nerves. And when you start to have sick nerves, either by injury, compression, abnormal chemistry, sympathetic dysfunction, fluoroquinolones, the fluoride injuring the nerves, you're going to get this type of inflammation. You're not going to be able to turn over your tissue the way that you need to. Here's one way of looking at that. So the quinolones chelate magnesium. That's why magnesium is so important, especially early on. They form complexes that are toxic to your body to be able to make new collagen. But then intracellularly, because of that chelating, you get free radicals because the magnesium is no longer buffering. You get peroxynitrite and superoxide ions that are causing cellular damage. And then the fluoride causing direct neurologic damage. You get substance P and metalloproteases spilling out because these sick nerves are now injuring the tissue directly. That affects all of those things. If you don't have a handle on some of the deeper processes and why they're happening, I don't understand how somebody can give somebody certain supplements when they don't understand what's going on in deeper processes. And these are the physiologic ones, the ones that we can map out and put in a book, not the ones that we were discussing earlier with placebo effect. Okay, so what does this lead to eventually? This can be quinolone or non-quinolone induced processes. There's an MRI of an Achilles. This whiter area right here is the sick part of the Achilles. This part's pretty normal. This part's pretty normal. Incidentally, the blood flow comes from this way and from the bone this way, and it meets about right here. This is called a watershed zone. If you have any problems with your blood flow, this is the most common area for you to have problems with tendinosis, with the Achilles tendon. Second most common is right where it inserts on the bone. Here's what it looks like in an ultrasound. This darker area here, you start to get loss of some of these You see the stripy pattern. That's the macro bundles of collagen that I was talking about that you can see under ultrasound. Sometimes you get these little bony spicules. You have actually what looks like a partial tear in it right here. Nope, I gotta back up. You have some fluid right there. That's some calcification, some thickening and darkening of the tendon right here. That's what it looks like under ultrasound. Okay. So as I told you, I'm going to use the Achilles as kind of the example of how complex and interrelated some of these things start to become. You guys might have seen this list that I put out on a couple of different groups just to help people understand that things are not symptom oriented, they're not site oriented, they're process oriented. If you don't understand the process of everything that goes into something occurring, like as complex as tendinosis, that's where I start telling people, please don't give others advice. You don't know how many of these pieces of the equation you have or what they might have. So you're going to hear this over and over and over from me. Imaging is really critical when you're dealing with nerves, when you're dealing with tendons, ligaments, capsules, joints. Knowing what's normal and abnormal in the imaging and being able to place regenerative agents directly where they need to go, if that's needed as part of the care, is absolutely critical. Pain does not equal degeneration. It does not equal tendinosis. There's a lot of reasons why somebody can have pain in their Achilles without there being anything wrong with the structure of the Achilles itself. So why are we going to avoid giving advice? Hopefully after this list of 12 things, you'll agree with me. If you don't, that's fine too. As we talked about, the quinolas cause magnesium depletion, get cytotoxic toxic jam and damage. Magnesium supplementation, extremely important. There are 3 types that I like. If you guys want to know, my favorite magnesium product is by Zymogen. It's called OptiMag Neuro. 3 different forms of magnesium in it, at least one of which crosses the blood-brain barrier readily. And then quinolone chelation, pretty important in the long term for the cytotoxic damage that's happening. Boron at the very least for that process. What else is happening in the Achilles? Adhesions. There can be adhesions between the Achilles and its sheath, or between the sheath and the surrounding tissue. Abnormal compression and tension forces can be present within those anomalies, and you can only see that in real-time ultrasound. You're actually having the person move their foot up and down to watch to see if there's wrinkling and pulling and torsing of the tissue to know if there's that piece of the equation. It's a very common thing. I see it in more than half of the individuals that have Achilles tendinosis, fluoroquinolone induced or not. So removing these adhesions that can happen in these spaces between your soft tissue is done by an advanced procedure called hydrodissection. That's really the only viable treatment for this part of the problem. You can, do a lot of flossing, a lot of movement. You can do ART, you can do MAT, different kinds of treatments to try to get things moving. But to really break the adhesions, that can only be done with a needle in that space, opening it up with fluid pressure. What else? So sometimes in the tissue itself, in the tendon itself, and around the tendon, there are neovessels and neonerves. It's part of a dysfunctional process. The body doesn't really understand degeneration very well. It's not its mode of communication. And the body's like, part of its failed healing attempt is just throwing like extra blood vessels and extra nerves in the equation to try to get things to heal. That becomes probably part of the deteriorating process overall. They can be seen under diagnostic ultrasound using like high dose dextrose to in your dissection to actually shrivel up all of these abnormal tissues around the dysfunctional tendinosis. that's the treatment of choice for taking care of that piece of it. But if you don't need to use it, you don't. But you only know if you need to use it if you can see it. Okay, then for the Achilles specifically, there's Haglund's deformity. It's a large rim of extra bone in the upper outer part or the upper part of the calcaneus. Um, sometimes called pump bump for women that are wearing certain kinds of shoes that tend to induce this. And that can be together or separate from quinolone tendinopathy. I tend to find that there's extra bone formed with tendon with fluoroquinolone toxicity. So you can treat it either under ultrasound or surgically. What else do you have in there? Presence of other soft tissue anomalies, such as bursts of deterioration. You can see these under ultrasound, possibly under MRI, and treating it again with agents to try to remove the abnormal stress that's leading to this bursal abnormality. It may be just the bursa, it's called the retrocalcaneal bursa, that sometimes is the painful structure. It has nothing to do with the tendon at all. Again, there may be some calcifications at the insertion or inside the tendon itself. These can be removed under guidance. You can plicate, beat them up, barbotage them, aspirate them. Calcifications inside of a tendon are always abnormal, usually due to previous trauma, but can be just chemically induced too, or stress induced with a lot of traction over a long period of time. That's like tension on it for a long period of time. So now we get into the neurologic pieces of this, where there's overlap now between the collagen abnormalities and the neurologic abnormalities. In my experience, you can't separate these things. They're always going on together. Rarely is there only just one piece of the equation happening. And this is extremely common because of the fluoride component and the cytotoxic damage to cells component in fluoroquinolone toxicity. And you know, starting to understand that there's separate parts of your neurologic system that need to be treated appropriately at each level starts to come into play here. So in and around abnormal neurologic structures, injecting to release and open up the tissue, but sometimes directly into nerves if those nerves are directly injured and they're losing their normal appearance with a fusiform or elliptical sort of shape to them. That's where you got some really sick nerves. Regenerative agents directly into the nerve, very vigilantly, very, very carefully, is really about the only way to get to that level of an abnormal nerve. I don't mind telling everybody I did that accidentally the first time when in 2013. It was a radial nerve in the arm that had been injured after a fracture and too tight of cast placement. A woman that was walking around with limp wrists, she couldn't extend her wrist at all for 6 months. And I was dissecting that nerve out of the tissue and the adhesions that were constricting it. And she got about 20% of her function back with the first procedure. Second procedure, I inadvertently placed the needle inside the nerve and watched the nerve balloon up as I was injecting it. Freaked me out. I didn't get any sleep that night. I told her, you know, this may lead to permanent damage. Well, I called her the next morning. She said, guess what I can do? And I was still grimacing, wondering what was happening. She said, I can extend my wrist. And I went, really? Hence started intraneural injections. I'm one of the only ones that does that in the United States because it's scary to do. You need to know where you are and where you aren't, and where you're putting your needle and how you're filling the nerve, when to start, when to stop. It's not easy technology to get. Okay, let's go up the chain in the neurologic string here. if you have an abnormal nerve supplying an area, that's a peripheral nerve. That's the peripheral neuropathy that everybody dreads and is feeling. But there's also changes that can happen at the level of the spine itself. That's where you get what's called radicular neuropathy. So the nerve, as it comes out of the spine, being compressed by a disc or arthritis or abnormal slippage of the vertebral body itself, leads to a sick nerve. That's compression on a nerve. Now that can be there before somebody has fluoroquinolone toxicity, and they then have symptomatology that's more severe afterwards. That's something I very commonly see, actually, that there's underlying abnormalities that now become symptomatic in people. And I think that's mostly mediated by the sympathetic nervous system, but it's probably also the peripheral nervous system, and perhaps even central. Some of these things are not known yet. So treatments of the nerve at the spine needs to happen when you're working on an Achilles specifically. About 90% of people that are non-fluoroquinolone have some silent neuropathy at the level of the nerve root. And it's their neurogenic inflammation, the abnormal stresses and compression forces that are happening because muscles aren't working well. That's part of the process of them developing Achilles tendinopathy. If you guys have ever looked it up, there's a good half dozen reports in the literature that PRP doesn't work for Achilles tendinopathy. Well, that's because all of these other pathways aren't being addressed. This is one of those things I hope I can leave as sort of a legacy to the rest of the medical system, that multi-level assessment, evaluation, and treatment is necessary even outside of fluoroquinolone toxicity. And I think I didn't say this previously, but when I started to put together the paradigms and protocols for fluoroquinolone toxicity years and years and years ago, I used 13 of my other paradigms and protocols in conjunction to be able to come up with a single protocol for fluoroquinolone toxicity. It took that many pieces of what I knew how to do to wrap a singular approach around fluoroquinolone toxicity. That's just another way of me telling you guys, this is really complex. And you already know that, but I'm going to keep telling you anyway. Okay, getting back to the physiologic abnormalities. Has anybody ever used meat tenderizer, pineapple, other things, bromelain, that break down the soft tissues to allow the meat to be more tender? You know, if you have a really poor physiologic environment, you are actually more or less becoming a meat tenderizer for all of the tissues, for all the soft tissues and supportive tissues in your body. You're destroying your tissue because of the chemistry that you're constantly subjecting it to. This is why, you know, if you go to a functional provider and you clean up your diet and you clean up your hormones and you clean up your gut, and suddenly all of a sudden you have more energy, you have less pain, your emotions better. That's all physiology, and that's separate and distinct from all of these other processes. This is why IVs feel good. Doesn't mean that anything's necessarily healing. You're just bathing everything in an improved chemistry, and your tissue starts to work better because it's not so interfered with chemically. Okay, we know that they're in soft tissue. There's very few, like tendons, ligaments, there are very few cells in those tissues. So cellular injections are usually what I use inside of these tissues when there's fluoroquinolone toxicity. That means bone marrow or adipose concentrates, because I'm going to try to replace some of those cells that have gotten significantly affected by life and the fluoroquinolone toxicity itself. And then blood flow. So because you have such low cellularity, you need to have enough, you can't really compromise your blood flow and have a tendon or ligament stay healthy. You'll notice as we go forward that blood flow is one of the important aspects of our discussion as far as healing goes, because you have such few tendons, ligaments to begin with. I'm sorry, cells inside your tendons, ligaments to begin with. So this is where we understand like what I call the watershed zone, where two capillary beds are coming together in the same place. It shows how important blood flow is, because that's where tendinopathy tends to form in our bodies in people that don't have fluoroquinolone toxicity. So sometimes I borrow things from my experience with fluoroquinolone toxicity and apply it to the rest of the population. Sometimes my understanding of the rest of the population ends up affecting fluoroquinolone toxicity. Having both populations allows me to be able to borrow back and forth like that, and ends up being a positive approach for all conditions that way. And with the Achilles, and in my original post out on the groups and here, I didn't mention the emotional quantum coordinated care and full spectrum healing approaches. I could have made that list probably twice longer, and how intermeshed the the assessment, evaluation, and treatment of just that one tissue is. Now this is true of every single part of the body. If you want to go through a healing process, you need to be able to assess and address at all those levels together and in an appropriate order for the way the person is presenting. We'll revisit the Achilles again at the end of the talk tomorrow, because we'll make it a little bit more complex. No, I'm saying complex. It's going to be a little more complete. And I know this is a lot, okay? Everybody take a breath. Remember, number one, you are your own healer. Number two, everything can heal. Reducing interference, augmenting your own healing capacities, learning how you can augment those things on your own, having a group of people that can use their skill sets, their very broad and deep skill sets, to be able to help you through that process is the most effective way that I found to be able to do this. I think I only told Mark this, but my original I did tell you guys, it was about 900 slides that I drew from to make these presentations over these couple of days. And I decided something partway through from the first time that I first posted about a month ago till now. This is actually in somewhat lesser detail than what I could have put this together for all of you. But understanding the challenges of paying attention this long, and really everybody what they want is the list of like to go do these things and you'll be better. I truncated these talks, and I'll be giving a talk every week in much greater detail for all of you people that want to understand these things in greater detail.
Yes.
You're complex. Healing is complex by its nature. I like to tell people this. Listen, you have so many overlapping mechanisms that protect you, so many overlapping mechanisms that kind of kick the can down the road to other places for other parts of your body to be able to take up strain. By the time you're symptomatic, by the time something's keeping you from going forward, you have a lot going on at many levels. That has to be the case, because you have so many ways to keep you moving forward in a functional direction. If you're getting stopped by symptoms, that means there's a lot going on. Now, there's a ton of ways to make those symptoms decrease. That's, kind of the cutting off the top of the iceberg. When you just cut off the top of the iceberg, then other parts of the iceberg are going to float to the top anyway, because you haven't taken care of 95% of the reason why things are happening. So I always leave that out there to you guys, how complex you want to approach your care. I figure my job is to have the biggest buffet out there for you to choose from. Okay. Fascia, who likes the gristle in their meat? Not many of us. So the fascial connections, these are these really fine tissues in between our tissues, and kind of connecting everything to everything. The fascial system actually, its stress patterns create a tension network throughout the whole body. And that's why we can actually hold ourselves together in one being, not because we have a skeleton, it's because we have a fascial framework connected to the tendons, ligaments, and bones that hold it all together. That actually ends up being like your whole body is almost like an infinity symbol from top to bottom, crossing at the diaphragm. And those are the fascial tension planes that are holding us together in that makeup. One of the chiropractors that work with us is, a lot of what he does actually is reduces tension on the diaphragm and follows it back to where it's coming from to understand how to guide a person through his part of their healing process. It's fascinating stuff. That's Dr. Fred Clary. So this is our artist representation of getting a needle into these fascial planes to create this fluid plane, taking care of the adhesions that have occurred in these fascial planes. And it's not depicted here, but around nerves as well. It is around this vessel. But these nerves get adhesed in these fascial planes, and they become sick just from the abnormal compression and tension that's occurring on them. That's an ultrasound version of a similar thing. That line is the fascial plane. This is in the hip region. And there's another little fascial plane that's being created. This is adipose or fat, a little bit of fluid inside that fat where some injection's been done. But right over the top of this part right here, this is a muscle. That's the fascial plane. And sometimes just getting a little bit of fluid there to unleash the adhesions, or I'm sorry, to reduce the adhesions that are constricting blood flow and neurologic compression, really an important piece of the care. It's very fine, elegant stuff to look at under ultrasound and guide people through. So the fascial network is not just structure. It is actually your basic unit of structure throughout your entire body, but it connects to the mechanical neural network throughout. We have what are called baroreceptors or proprioceptors. They tell us how much pressure is on our tissue, and we have automatic reflexes set up from our tissue to our spinal cord that's constantly unloading and moving our stress patterns so that we can, first of all, not injure tissue, but second of all, actually have higher ordered function. If you talk to somebody who's like a professional ski jumper, they'll tell you the second that they're coming off the jump, whether or not they're going to land a quadruple flip, triple twist, because they have so many spinal reflexes that have become an advanced level in their body. They know where they are in space at all times, and they can predict what's going to happen. Not dissimilar from you being able to walk without thinking about it, unless you have a certain color hair. All right, that's the second blonde joke of the day. I'm sorry. But these fascial networks are communication neurology too. They're not just structure, which gives rise to the concept of tensegrity. So this is the tension-based structure of the body that I was talking about. That name is called tensegrity. And it's the complex interaction between all of those functions. And it's like your body's playbook. You know, it knows where to go and what to do before you're even doing it. Those are the automatic reflexes that are set up at the level of the spinal cord. Now, that's important for all of our function and our motion. There's one area it ends up being extremely critical, and we're going to talk about that when we get to floxy neck. Okay, I promised to do a couple of slides on blood flow. Big muscular and arteries have a ton of collagen in them. That's the blue inside of those pictures. And what did we talk about having some trouble early on in our collagen talk? Collagen has trouble because the cellularity and blood flow to it is reasonably minimal given the amount of stresses. It's almost like your body makes the perfect protein and then kind of puts it out there and says, okay, you're on your own. Now it shapes it and changes it, but it's very slow. The tendons and ligaments of the body with regular weightlifting change for 6 to 12 months before they're adapted to the new loads. So when I'm doing regenerative injections in people's tendons and ligaments, I just tell them the body's going to be changing that for the next 6 to 12 months. Doesn't mean you're going to hurt that whole time, but the process isn't done until at least then. That's happening in the vessels as well. What do you think happens if your structure inside of your vessels is compromised and now you have weak spots, just like those tendons that I showed you, the Achilles tendons that I showed you? What if that happens in the middle of the muscular portion of an artery? There's another version of it. We're talking about the purple and the, I don't know, we'll call that pea color, more like puke, but what if those start to get compromised? Or the structure that's inside of the muscular layers, the collagen structure. I should have done this in this order, actually. That's what happens. This bigger or this smaller hole to the left is an aneurysm, a tear in the middle of the artery. The reason that happens largely is because of collagen and secondarily the neurologic effect on the cells making the collagen inside of your large blood vessels. I have known fluoroquinolone toxicity patients that have had the aortic aneurysms. By the time you get to that point, if you survive the aneurysm, that's usually a Gore-Tex graft that they're going to be putting into the section that has the aneurysm. But I've known individuals that have had it in their gut too, the gut arteries. I haven't known anybody that had it in their arms or legs. Go ahead and pipe up when we get to the discussion section if you've known anybody that had that. So here's another important piece about blood flow that I found is really important. Pericytes are essentially, for the most part, the covering and they are the covering and make the tube of the capillary. So these are stem cells actually that cover your capillaries. I think that's a brilliant way to create a body. If you have a cut, that goes through, hundreds of capillaries probably. And immediately right there in that place, there are these pericytes that are there to heal the tissue damage. I can get those stem cells actually. That's a very specific process that I developed about 5 years ago. That adds to what was usually done with liposuction to get the pericytes. But I put the small in there to understand that there's blood flow problems at the level of the big vessels because of aneurysm, but also at the small ones, because if you took a fluoroquinolone and it's affecting every cell in the body, there's a possibility that these pericytes are not as healthy as they once were. Now that cuts two ways. To understand it is a good thing, but to understand also that they're functional enough to help you go through a healing process is also extremely important. Having gone through every type of regenerative agent that exists out there in my 16 years of doing this, I will still tell you that your cells are the best ones to use to help you heal. That's a whole other talk, but so combinations of collagen depletion, neurologic dysfunction, cellular and tissue dysfunction is your aneurysm problem. There's a black box warning, I think, in about 2016. This is either gonna wake you up or bug you, one of the two. This is called the whip animation feature in PowerPoint. So just for collagen, you can't have sick nerves and have good healing. This is why I actually have a completely separate day to normalize the sympathetic nervous system before I ever work on tissue in certain parts of the body. Many steps to optimize that sympathetic overdrive. That's something we'll cover in the neurologic section. Optimizing tension and compression. Sometimes you need physical therapy, chiropractic, Rolfing, and this is also where hydrodissection comes in. If you have a bunch of adhesions around an Achilles tendon, it's going to have abnormal tension and compression forces. That's going to affect neurologic function. That's going to affect blood flow. That's going to affect neurogenic inflammation. Got to optimize your cellular function. This is partly total body chemistry, nutrition, mitochondria, compression, tension, functions, blood flow, optimizing blood flow. I'm not going to try to, I'll never ask somebody to exercise through or, do something minimally invasive if they have, a big vessel that has an aneurysm. But optimizing blood flow isn't just aneurysms. It's, are you getting the nutrition that you need to your pericytes in your capillary bed? And that means, do you have abnormal tension and compression forces from adhesions? Rolfing can help that. Hydrodissection can help that. Do you know that your sympathetic nervous system can either compress or can either decrease or increase blood flow depending on which part of the body that you're talking about? So we need to work on sympathetic nervous system if we're going to work on blood flow, improving chemistry, tensegrity, and then biologic injections. I intentionally put, my sub specialty at the bottom because ultimately I'm selfish. I want those injections to be as effective as they possibly can be. And if I clear all those other things and optimize all those other things before I do the biologic injections, they're going to have the best effect. I like success. I like people to go on independently live their life. All right, that's a pretty big section. There's a lot in there. So let's go on to a little bit of Q&A here. All right, collagen, tendons, ligaments, fascia, the intima level of big vessels. This is one of the big places that people have experienced their pain, is in these collagen structures. What questions does everybody have about the collagen side of healing? Was that a question? Was that a question, Jill?
If I may ask a question, this is Alex here. The question is about the procedure of hydrodissection, which I believe the purpose is to remove the adhesions between ligaments and nerves.
Yep.
And muscles. So the question is this: is it possible that the adhesions there in the first place, perhaps for a good reason, to provide some sort of structural stability naturally? And is it possible that by solving one problem, by performing the dissection, we solve one problem, but create some other type of problem potentially by eliminating that adhesion that was there by design? Does that make sense?
So normal fascia tissue are not adhesions. And it's a great question. You don't want to alter the body too much just because you can. And going kind of crazy with your procedural approaches is something that we sometimes do as physicians. So I appreciate the concept of at least being temperate and reserved about the procedural approach. So where you want to be a little bit more assertive with how you're doing hydrodissection is where there's significantly abnormal motion, changes in blood flow, changes in neurologic shape. So when you're seeing that, then you really want to open it up around those tissues quite a bit. When it's just some abnormal motion, or there's a previous injury there and there might be some actual scar tissue, not just adhesions, then you want to be a little bit more assertive with it. But just because it's there doesn't mean that you have to be aggressive with it as a target. So being appropriate in your amount of dissection is, I shouldn't even say appropriate, optimal. Kind of keep going back to the first do no harm sort of thought pattern. Just because opening it up something generally works well doesn't mean that too much of it is good. That answer your question, Alex?
Yeah, thank you. I do have another related question in relation to hydrodissection. Your presentation was focused on the Achilles area. I was suggested the hydrodissection in the area of shoulders, specifically including coracohumeral and inferior glenohumeral ligaments and suprascapular nerves deep to the omohyoid muscle. Are there any nuances, any specifics, anything that unique to this area?
A lot of neurovascular structures going through there. And who suggested that?
A regenerative specialist I visited at some point.
Okay, in the United States, I know most of the people.
Yeah, it's in the United States. It's a Rosen clinic in Washington D.C. area, north of Bethesda.
Okay. Haven't trained those individuals. I've trained about 400 physicians how to do regenerative procedures, and haven't trained any of those individuals, so I don't know their skill set. That's the axillary region. It's a common area for abnormal adhesions. We end up having a lot of, abnormal shoulder and neck position, and we just that's part of the reason we get stuck there. In my opinion, taking care of the neck and its posture and alignment first, its posture alignment and stability first, is more important than taking care of the axilla region that you're talking about. Because the neck is going to set all of the other postural motion functions of everywhere else, because it has the highest amount of proprioceptors. We're going to get into that in a minute. But that's what I've noticed over time is you can take care of some of these things that are down the line, but getting back to the upper neck is the most important area to go through. It doesn't mean you don't have anything wrong in the axilla. It's just, in my opinion, the order of approach is very important.
Got it. And so what happens once the fluid that was injected to separate the tissues and get rid of the abnormal compression, the fluid goes away, I suppose, eventually. And so once the fluid is absorbed, gets absorbed,
yep.
Will the compression return? How long the effect would last?
Only doing dissection, I don't know, because for me, adding postural restoration, stability, deep stabilizer activation, Rolfing, whole body motion patterns, I don't just do dissection. All of these things need to be done in concert with one another, in my opinion, because it's, best potential outcome and least likelihood of needing more procedures in the future.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Good questions, Alex. Anyone else want to talk more about collagen? Tendons, ligaments, joints, capsules, arthritis?
At the beginning, you we're talking about the magnesium supplementation, and of course, that's the first thing we all found out and knew and share with others and whatever, and find relief from. There's always been a question in our community as far as our deficiency in magnesium. How much of this is related to aftermath of the fluoroquinolones, or how much of it is a likelihood that we went into this deficient in magnesium, either because we just didn't have it in our diet or for some existing metabolic reason? Were we people, prone to magnesium problems that thus experienced an intense quinolone reaction, or is it pretty much that we're random people and we had an intense quinolone reaction and thus we are devastated of magnesium, or some kind of
I'm going to say yes and yes, Mark.
Yeah, both.
Yeah. The most intelligent and, I don't know, functionally capable human being that I've ever met is Mark Harris. He's done talks for us twice on mitochondrial function for FAHA. Blew my mind both times. I thought I knew a lot, and in 2-hour talks, he completely undid and unraveled my understanding of what I thought I understood. He had his MD and PhD when he was 12 years old. So
yeah,
he's a bit of a phenom. Anyway, his opinion is the number one important thing that you need for your body is oxygen. It's the only thing you can't live without every day. Number 2 is water. And number 3 is magnesium. And his opinion is everybody is deficient in magnesium pretty significantly. And if you look at the number of metabolic and enzymatic functions that magnesium has, he's probably right. There's kind of a nice way to understand whether or not you're a bit deficient. If you take magnesium supplementation, it should loosen up the stools a bit. And basically you want to be at the point where you're having 2 bowel movements a day between diet and magnesium supplementation. And the sweet spot that I tell people is increase your amount daily until your stools are too loose, and then go 1 step back, and that's your ideal dose.
At least for that time. As with anything, it seems to be that you find your balance, but if you think that you're going to be balanced 2 years from now, it's probably not the case.
Yeah, that'll always be an evolving process too. And of all the different forms, if I remember right, actually, originally magnesium chloride was what Dr. The one that wrote the book early on.
Cohen.
Yeah, Dr. Cohen was a really a big advocate of that. I like I said, I like some that have the 3 and 8 and
3 and 8.
yeah. 3 and 8. I think it's 3 and 8 sulfate and glycinate.
Bisglycinate is.
Those 3 are the ones that are in OptiMag Neuro, if I recall correctly.
Yeah, we keep those, and then we got you just your generic combination ones that we take, and then we have the citrate if it's like we're specifically seeking to flush it through rather than absorb it if we're trying to.
Yep. Not a bad thing for everyone to do from time to time.
Yep. What's your take on Epsom salt? Is that a safe or an unsafe source for internal, like, flushing? Lots of magnesium through you.
Generally, the naturopaths that I work with would rather it not be ingested.
Okay.
And there's so many other forms of magnesium.
Yeah.
You definitely want one that's going to cross blood-brain barrier.
Watch out
There's
for
so
the-
many. What's that?
It's just,
I think that's 3 and 8 that goes past the blood-brain barrier.
yeah, that's the Mercola. We're getting ours from Mercola, and that's what it's claiming.
Yeah. But there are other forms of it I've just never really used. There are, at least 10 different forms of magnesium. And per my discussion previously, I try not to bleed too much into everybody else's pathways. I end up having more contact with the population than the other providers do. So I try to remember, I try to get up on what everybody is doing, so I can convey that to everyone. But at the end of the day, I'm going to know more than almost anybody about regenerative injections, and a fair amount about everything else. But I try to let them answer those types of questions at the end of the day, because they're better at it than I am.
I like the cascading domino example. Really, I was like, oh, that's just absolutely exactly what happened to me. It was just like, oh, just, everything set in so quickly, so many different things. And it was just the idea of the like that starts off with the little row, and then there's 3 rows, and then each row starts exploding into more rows, and then they take off in different directions of the side through what's that, what's his name, Berg devices with the crazy, the ball rolls down and drops off and hits the pan and flips the thing over, and all the things tumble and the stuff breaks, and so it's like dominoes becomes the Ruby Goldberg thing, and just all in a kind of a humorous, colorful illustration of everything falling apart at the same time.
Yeah, watch the dominoes in the movie that Will Smith was in. Oh, what the heck was that movie? It was where his kid died of cancer. He had these massive like domino uh, cascades set up, and yeah, you just knock one over and it knocks over thousands.
Yeah.
But that says something about the resiliency of our body. I mean, all of these things can be going horrifically wrong, and yet we're still alive. It's amazing.
Yeah, I guess you could see that illustration, all that happening, and then the chains coming back together and coming back together, and then it's just like, ooh, there's just one string of dominoes.
And that's been part of the challenge of this. So there's so many different things that it affects at very root levels that it's hard for people to not become symptomatic. Now, I've known those fluoroquinolone toxicity patients who took one pill and it like completely upended their life. The majority of people, though, are, I took a course, or I took this 6-week course, or I took, like 10 courses over over 20 years, or that seems to be more common overall. And some of the people that have particular deletions and changes in their genome, abnormalities in their ability to clear certain metabolites, those are the individuals that are, one pill and they're done. But it should be obvious to the medical community that the number of people that have these reactions to fluoroquinolones with repeated doses just should tell them, okay, this is not a good thing. I was kind of sad that the FDA didn't follow the European Medical Association. What was that, 2019, that they pretty much put the kibosh to most of the use of fluoroquinolones? Anybody remember that off the top of their head?
My conversations with people in Europe is that, yeah, so there was some wording, but when it really came down to it, it was not particularly profound, and they're still handing them out. Maybe not quite as much, but it's not like they seem to think that the FDA was more profound with their 2016 announcement and this and that, and that it must be more restricted in America. And then, so Yeah, the numbers I don't think dropped profoundly. It's, there's been some motion in the right direction. We keep plugging away at it, but it's not like all of a sudden they greatly, massively shut them down or anything. That didn't happen.
Well, they're awesome bioterror weapons.
Yeah, that's pretty much what they are. I mean, they, I had that flesh-eating infection, so in my case, I think it saved my life. But mismanaged horribly, multi-dosed, double-dosed, triple duration, in conjunction with all kinds of other drugs that shouldn't have been prescribed with them. But I mean, it's I think if they'd just saved these drugs for only the worst case scenarios and used them then, that's how it should have been done all along. Then we wouldn't have the antibiotic resistance either. But there's people in our community who want them banned, and I'm not in that camp.
No, just use judiciously.
Yeah.
Oh, question from Alice. Do you treat the same way a 13-year-old that's been floxed? In this way, Alice, yes. I'm a big proponent of process-oriented care and individualized programs, meaning, we're going to assess you at many different levels, many different approaches, many different systems, and then put that all together and find what's meaningful for that particular individual, and then figure out what order we're going to do things in. All that happens remotely now. For over a year, I've been doing 4 provider evaluations. That's naturopath, dietitian, myself, and a PhD psychologist. And all of us are from our own perspective saying, this is where I categorize this person. And then we put together what's going to happen in pre-care, what's going to happen while somebody's in Minnesota, and what's going to happen after. Well, what happens afterwards is usually determined while we're in Minnesota. And it's always the same process. Do I do the same regenerative injections on a 13-year-old? 11 is the youngest that I've treated with stem cell therapies in my 16 years of doing this. That was a neck. Had a 12-year-old last year wrestler that I did a neck on. We'll get into the Floxy neck a little bit. It's a weekend course in and of itself, what's happening, why it's happening. These will just be the thumbnail versions of what's going on with Floxy neck, but that's the most common area that's affected in everybody. That affects everything else downstream. Let's see. And do they recover better? A 13-year-old 13-year-olds are happily growing still and have lots and lots of hormones. Can it affect their growth? That I'm not sure. There would be a likelihood that it may affect growth, because the cells in the growth plate are going to be affected just like every other cell. Just like the eggs that a woman carries are going to be affected. So it could affect their growth. I don't know that for sure, and I don't know enough kids over the years with fluoroquinolone toxicity to even get a sense of a subjective response. Mark, have you heard that from anybody over time?
Okay, I lost you there a bit. Can you ask me again? What was going on?
Have you had anybody anecdotally say that the children that were floxed, that they had effect to their growth?
So yeah, there's been quite a few people that have had kids without any issues, and sadly, there's been other people who believe that their children are harmed because of the fluoride. But there's so many factors, I mean, it's with all the other things assaulting kids these days, all the different chemicals and radiation and whatever else in the environment, and so it's hard to say. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely a mixed report. But I would think just by the very nature of the fluorine, the addition of the fluorine is, I mean, the benefit of these drugs is that they penetrate everywhere, for better or worse. You know, you got the infection in the bone marrow or inside the blood-brain barrier, the fluoroquinolones go there. But that means that, and they affect us. The damage is clear that it's on every, you know, just on a cellular level, a molecular level. So I you know, I won't give blood, and I certainly, I was younger and still envisioned the possibility of maybe having kids when I was first locks, but you know, that sort of phases past my life. But you know, I would not have had kids because I you know, I think everything in my body is so compromised that I wouldn't.
This is where my opinion is that, you know, outside of life and death situations, no female of childbearing age should ever have these, and no children should ever have these.
Yeah, that's and even anyone really, you know, it's just that they should be reserved for the, you know, basically a third strike type thing. It's like, okay, the other antibiotic failed, and then this antibiotic failed, and now, you know, this person's going to die if we don't do something. It's then.
Yeah, I agree with you in the long term. In the history of medicine, it's typically women of childbearing age and children that are scrutinized more completely.
Yeah, it should be most protected.
Yeah. So,
Dr. Hansen, a quick question about back to the collagen healing topic. Intrasubstance tears. Has it been your observation that this type of tears is the most common tear that those injured by fluoroquinolone toxicity develop?
yeah, in my opinion.
What is the treatment approach that you use?
Okay, so pretty much every single area of tendinosis that I've injected in the last 16 years under ultrasound guidance has micro tears in it. They have, you know, so tendinosis equals micro tears. So, you know, doing all of the other things to reverse the reasons why that tendinosis was there in the first place, which was kind of that big summation slide that I had, while working the tendon appropriately under ultrasound guidance with the needle, injecting which regenerative agents, which coalescing agents need to be injected there. That's outside, you know, that's beyond the scope of this. That's what I teach fairly advanced level physicians how to do.
Do you see those tears? They as a rule develop during the initial onset, the acute onset of the toxicity, or you also see them developing down the road?
I think there's kind
like
of a
years after the intake.
I think there's kind of a biphasic thing that happens, meaning in any human being, I'm going to be able to find tendinosis somewhere if I looked around long enough. There's a lot of it that's not symptomatic. So what happens with the fluoroquinolones physiologically and neurologically, and its direct insults to collagen, will make oftentimes that silent tendinosis symptomatic tendinosis. So it didn't just suddenly like erode quickly overnight. It just made manifest what was there and symptomatic. And then there's kind of like a slow process that happens over time with people. The individuals who have tears very quickly after taking the fluoroquinolone, that was tendinosis and microtearing that was already there. And you see the same thing with the sympathetic nervous system with deep emotional issues. There's underlying stuff that's all of a sudden made much more severe by the fact that the fluoroquinolones are affecting so many things simultaneously. But then there's this indolent thing that happens over time with long-term neurologic and collagen effects that can then pop up in many places, much more widespread and probably more severe than it otherwise would have been. And that can be, you know, over long periods of time that happens. That's gonna be variable for each person based on their genetics, their chemistry, their epigenetics, their activity, their abnormal motions and postures. And that makes sense, Alex?
It does. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, we're almost 3 hours into it. Let's take 10. Oh, wait a minute, Josh had a question. Gua sha or Chinese scraping physical therapy effective for removal of fascial adhesions? Josh, what I've seen when I've actually looked like pre and post, those kinds of procedures, and you could say this thing with same thing with Estom and Graston. What I see for the most part, pre and post ultrasound is not that the adhesions are removed, but the tensile kind of motion and force and mechanical forces that are being put on that tissue end up more or less stretching the adhesions that are there, not removing them. That's why I say the only real way to get, rid of adhesions or, to treat them fully is to get hydrostatic pressure directly in the space. Doesn't mean there is not some good effect from doing the other things there is. I wouldn't go as far as doing like fascia blaster where they're scraping so hard that they're causing bruising all over the place. Doing a little bit more gently, say with what do you call that? Where you're putting the suction on it. What is that called? Dang it. You're using a little flame to evacuate the oxygen, and it creates negative pressure, suctions it up. Why can't I think of what that's called? Cupping. Thank you. Appreciate that, Tef. I was floundering there. Thank you for saving me. And yes, exercise can definitely help with blood flow and collagen formation. The personal trainer that I have working with the group, Jonathan Waters, developed some of his microprogression exercise just for the fluoroquinolone community, because the known benefits of any kind of movement are so significant that we wanted that to be in the equation early and often if people wanted to take advantage of it. It's kind of like sleep. Exercise is, it's known, sleep is known to have positive benefits. I put it into the equation as it's critical. You need motion. The physical therapists like to say motion is lotion. You know that one, Josh. All right. Looks like we don't have any new messages. Sorry, I was missing the written messages, guys. Why don't we take 15? Why don't we come back at 10 after?
Dr. Hansen?
Yes, ma'am.
I'm sorry. I actually have a question about that, about the cupping and the gua sha. So, my acupuncturist, I've actually had two, and they both said the same thing, that they were so surprised by, given all my issues, that I actually tolerated both of those things. And I don't know, it just made, when you were just saying all that, because were you saying the cupping would be okay to do and like gua sha, right? Were you saying cupping's okay or not okay?
Of all of those things, I like cupping partly because I think that you're also getting effect on the superficial sensory nerves without grinding on them.
Okay.
Superficial sensory nerve work is generally called neuroprolotherapy. That was actually started by Mark Harris, the one I mentioned previously. He picked up on some research from 100 years ago from a couple of German brothers and brought it back into the world. And yeah, I like cupping. Probably that's one of the most significant, like, fascial sorts of treatments that I like. Gentle Estom, Grastom, Gua sha is, I think, really ART, all those things, Rolfing, they're all really good for the practitioner who's really sensitive to what they're feeling and what they're experiencing with the person at the time. For somebody who just does it technically, I don't have any practitioners that I send patients to who are only doing things technically. They need to have a really good sixth sense about how they're working with the person, because that's really critical to outcome.
Okay. And so, and it's because it's helping at that nerve level, and then it's also breaking up, but not big, like breaking up the tissue, but not to an extreme. Is that
Yeah, you're
why
getting
it's kind of helping us, but not, you know, cause I guess because they were just so surprised. They're like, you are so fragile, but yet you can handle this. So I just was wanting to kind of go back and give them feedback.
Yeah, well, you're getting so many positives out of it, because yes, you're at least getting stretching of the fascial planes. It's not going to go down more than a couple centimeters, but you're at least getting some stretching. You're helping with the superficial sensory nerve piece of it. You might be helping a bit with some of the peripheral nerves, but then you're also getting blood flow that way too. And it's kind of a passive way of doing what exercise does. So that might be one of those really early and often things to do, so you can go into something a little more active.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it. Sorry for holding up your break. That actually really helps put some pieces together for me. So thank you.
You're welcome. All right, we'll be back at 10 after, everyone, okay?
What time is it, Dennis? Oh, this started at 10. So 10, 11, 12, another hour. I haven't heard anything from Sarah.
Going over the sympathetic analogs to CRPS and PTSD in fluoroquinolone toxicity. It's one of the three most important components, in my opinion. Let's go ahead and share screen again. Where did my talk go? All right, this was the second part of fluoroquinolone toxicity that was brought to my attention, and this was by a patient in Colorado, as I said, that sent me about 80 articles on the neurologic component of it. We've talked some about dysfunctional nerves, the effect that has on tissues, on cells, on neuromuscular function, neurogenic inflammation. There are other things that are going on with nerves. There's typically, the body almost has enough resources to be able to get through a single hit. But if you have previous injury, abnormal sympathetic supply in the area, current nerve compression, a little bit of diabetes, and then you take fluoroquinolones, much different than if you had a pristine body and took fluoroquinolones. Sympathetic, in my mind, is its own beast. Peripheral neuropathy, there's underlying genetics for that. The quinolone-induced cellular function, fluoride-induced direct neurologic damage, and then the underlying medical conditions. Sympathetic dysfunction, you'll hear it early and often from me, particularly in the head and neck region. PTSD, floxy neck pain, dysfunction of the nerve coordination areas called ganglia. That can affect the brain directly, actually. The guy who started doing stellate ganglion block for PTSD. It's Eugene Lipov in Chicago. He came up to train with me because I've been doing it under ultrasound much longer than he has. An amazingly innovative doc. About 80 or 90% of people with PTSD will get significant remission of their symptoms for anywhere from 1 to 12 months with reset of the sympathetic ganglia in the neck, because there are fibers that go from these ganglia to our brain. He was really excited. He found this 1958 anatomy textbook that showed this, and he was able to start to understand why resetting of these peripheral ganglia in the sympathetic system were affecting the brain so significantly. The interrelations with that and floxy neck we're going to talk about. Pain, on average, and this is supported in literature, and I see this with my patients, full body pain is probably mediated about 50% by the fight or flight nervous system in a hyper aroused state. So it was 6 years ago, I started adding the cervical sympathetic reset to all of my major procedures. I don't even charge for it. It's a way to really significantly prepare tissue, prepare the mind, and give positive effects on its own for the whole process. I've been needed to make some interesting solutions for the fluoroquinolone population, which has changed what I do for everybody. So I use oxytocin, that's happy hormone, that directly blocks and resets the fight or flight nervous system. I was the first one doing that about 4 years ago. I've used some ketamine in with it. I've used dextrose, which can reorient glucocorticoid receptors in pain regions. Use some Serapin, which is a nerve modulating agent, and sometimes PRP around in my stellate ganglion resets. All those will have an effect. I still put in some ropivacaine, the anesthetic, even though it's not good for mitochondria. I still use a very small amount of it with fluoroquinolone toxicity, maybe 1 cc out of the 8 or so that I use. Other physical, mental, spiritual, emotional, energetic, life stressors combining with sympathetic dysfunction is sort of like putting little gas on the fire. They all work negative synergy together. In the body, this is complex regional pain syndrome. Now, the way I describe this to people is this. If you were put into the most stressful, painful, traumatic situation that you've ever been in your entire life, you would act just like you had PTSD. Now, the difference of PTSD is it's kind of bled into all parts of your life, but situationally, you essentially have situational PTSD. Now, that means, in my mind, that PTSD is a spectrum. It's not you have it or don't have it. Everybody has it. It's just whether or not it's being overtly manifest at that moment or not. The same thing occurs in the body. When you've been injured, the fight or flight nervous system activates in that area, shuts down your deep stabilizing muscles, hyperstimulates your major mobilizing muscles. That leads to a rigid, protected region. It's sort of like your body making a cast around your affected area. That's how it protects itself. It changes blood flow, it changes other neurologic function. And that takeover, in my mind, and this is my opinion, doesn't ever go back to exactly normal. And people will oftentimes say, yeah, I injured that 30 years ago, but it went away and now it's back. That's partly your sympathetic nervous system that's mediating all of that. So in my mind, everybody has complex regional pain syndrome because we've all been injured. And what I see with fluoroquinolone toxicity is that those previously injured areas become symptomatic much more quickly because they're somewhat chemically sick tissues with underlying sympathetic dysfunction. And That's my story and I'm sticking to it. We all have PTSD, we all have CRPS. It's just whether or not it's currently symptomatic. Make those tissues and the emotional function completely normal. Takes some really deep and really intricate work. Some of the stuff that we've discussed with cupping and dissection and using regenerative agents, there's analogs for that for the brain and PTSD. And it takes a great deal of effort to do that. Most of us are not sympathetic. Are not symptomatic enough to want to continue to chase down those underlying reasons. We got to go on and go forward with other parts of life. Here's something that I learned over the years, working mostly with CRPS and with fluoroquinolone toxicity, is there are 6 levels of the neurologic system and that we can affect and function. Central, of course, the brain and spinal cord. The centralized pain syndromes where pretty much the central nervous system has become kind of sick and it's dysfunctioning and being a driver of pain rather than like a mediator of it. That happens in the central nervous system. I believe that's very, very tightly connected to fight or flight nervous system or sympathetic dysfunction, which we already talked about a bit with chronic pain. That's probably about 50% of the equation. The nerve roots, that's where the nerve comes out of the spine, mentioned here because it's a really common place for there to be impingement, compression. That's your sciatica. The neck region corollary to that is first rib syndrome or brachial plexopathy. Femoral nerve is commonly compressed in the lower extremities. That's the L2, 3, 4 level that it comes from. And then after that, we have the nerve plexuses, the major nerves that combine from multiple levels of the cervical spine and lumbar spine roots. And then peripheral nerves, so the break-offs of those really big nerve plexi. There's a lot going on in the peripheral nerves. These tightened areas in the between the fascial planes, or sometimes where clothes are worn, or sometimes where injuries and scars have occurred. That's where peripheral nerves are affected mechanically. And then superficial sensory nerves. This is neuroprolotherapy, where we are working on the nerves that are very superficial, but they have axons that dive deeply through the entire layers of tissue and start to affect everything deep. What I found is there's kind of a circular pathway where all of these things are affecting each other, and it's a negative cascade for the most part. Once one of them's irritated, it starts to irritate the other ones because of the compensating mechanisms that each of them have. And then that goes back to the first level, and then it just keeps going in a big circle. So interrupting as many of these levels and layers as we can will affect all of the other layers. The nervous system is essentially a big ball of wires and interconnected at many levels. So affecting these individually and together in a particular order is how I ended up developing paradigms for complex regional pain syndrome in 2012. That was absorbed into my fluoroquinolone treatment as neurologic day. That's I'm using PRP at all of these different levels to reorient the neurologic system. Because one of the problems with sympathetic dysfunction is tissue does not heal well when the fight or flight nervous system is activated. Think of it this way. Your nervous system does not care about a sprained ankle when you're running away from a tiger. Now, most of us are, to some degree, are in that state where we think that we're running away from a tiger all the time. So we're in sympathetic hyperdominance a lot. And tissues don't heal very well in that scenario because it's not important. The rest and repair mechanisms are just not needed when you think you have to avoid something that's going to kill you. So that order of importance in the neurologic system is reflected in our ability to heal, in our inability to heal. So we're going to bring some of these topics together into what I think is the most important singular area of the body. This is definitely the most effect on people's function and healing. And that was craniocervical instability. So instability between the head and neck that is having a lot of downstream effects. I did a talk with Dennis Wogan on this about 2.5 years ago. He's the chiropractor that coined the term floxy neck, actually. So we're gonna go into a fair amount of what floxy neck is. If I'm known for anything nationally, it's this, and I'm gonna try to explain to you why. So for your own symptoms, look up those 3 things: craniocervical instability, Barré-Liao syndrome, and dysautonomia. And how many of those symptoms do you have? Because it's going to include brain fog, emotional changes. It's going to change. It's going to be headaches, pain in the nerves. It's going to be pain in the shoulder girdle and upper back region. If you talk to the upper cervical chiropractors, they'll say most lower back pain and nerve problems is caused by that segment that's right between the head and the neck, the cranial cervical region. This is easily a weekend course on its own, just describing all of the mechanisms and all of the injections to do for this. I used to give a talk on this in a couple of hours in Grand Cayman every year. And it's of the most critical importance, one of the top 3 things that's going on in pretty much everybody with fluoroquinolone toxicity. And here's why. So the upper cervical segments, interesting. I think I lost. I'm going to pause this for a second because I think this pulled up the wrong version of this. I tightened this up just a little bit. I want to make sure you guys are seeing the most current version of it. Sorry for the little hiatus. Huh. Oh well. It was right. I was wrong. I know there's a version that has a little bit more detail to it, but I'm probably overloading you guys with that anyway. So the head to the second vertebra, it's the upper cervical spine. It's this area up here. In this area, your brainstem, spinal cord, blood vessels going to and from the brain are all in that area. And your nervous system protects that area because of all these critical structures. Remember, we talked about proprioception and the pressure receptors throughout the body telling us where we are in space and what pressure is happening. They're called baroreceptors. When stress occurs, the positions unload the stress in the upper cervical spine. Why? Because your brain wants to, or your nervous system wants to protect brainstem, spinal cord, and the blood vessels going to and from the brain. There's a big problem with this, and I haven't been struck down by lightning for saying this, but we essentially have a defect in our creation where a 10-pound head is sitting on 2 golf tees held together by duct tape, the ligaments and fascia and capsules. So you have the most unstable segment in the body mechanically, right where your most critical structures are going through. That's a problem. Now, the bigger problem with that is because your neurologic system is dialed in to protect that area, you don't feel the symptoms in the upper cervical segments. So what goes down to the lower spine, to the neck, to the lower neck, to the shoulders, the upper back, the lower back is all dominoes further down from the most powerfully protected area of the body between the head neck junction. Okay. If allopathic medicine is good at anything, it's finding a symptom and then finding its immediate precursor problem. It doesn't recognize the upper cervical spine as the most important neuromuscular controlling section of the body. Chiropractors do, though. They've been teaching this for 120 years. It took me a good 8 or 10 years for them to convince me because I was so powerfully, symptom based in my approaches. But they're the ones who turned my mind on this. And once I did, and I saw the downstream effects in people's function and the upstream effects into the brain, I haven't gone back. This is the most important thing to take care of. Now, remember all of those critical structures, the brainstem, spinal cord, blood vessels? That makes it the most challenging area to inject. You should be cringing a little bit. I'm going into extremely protected areas when I'm doing these procedures. There are only a half dozen of us that are really highly trained in the country to do these injections and have done hundreds of cases. I had to choose even who to trust my own daughter to do these injections. She had been in 4 car accidents in 4 years, none of them her fault. But a head-on collision at 55 miles an hour from somebody who went through a red light. And I had to decide who to have her work with. That was not an enjoyable thing to do because I know what was happening and, but this is the most important area of the body. It's 7 vertebrae in the cervical spine. Normal neck is curved, about a 30, 40 degree curve in the neck. That curve actually increases stability and increases the amount of load that the body can have when the curve is in the front to back direction. When it's in the side to side direction, that's scoliosis. And it's injury to the upper cervical region actually that causes most scoliosis. So when you get injured in that area, and that can happen at birth. That can happen when you fell off the merry-go-round when you were 7, when your brother threw you down the steps at 12, when you were in a sports injury in football at age 16, or when you were in a car accident, or you just fell on the ice. There's so much mechanical stress between that head and neck junction. Everybody has whiplash. Everybody has injuries to these areas. The reason it's not understood is because we don't have symptoms right in that region. By the time we get symptoms in that region, that means the neurologic system is not able to accommodate for the stresses anymore. That's when we start to get what's termed Barré-Liao syndrome. That's the symptoms are, emotionally based, headache based, nerve based. You're getting changes and fluctuations in blood pressure, changes in hearing, changes in vision. That's because your brainstem is now getting significant amounts of increased stress. So it's not if someone was injured there, it's that everyone is injured there. Literally 2 people in the last 10 years have not had an abnormal digital motion x-ray. That's a functional movement-based x-ray that shows where the bones are sliding, gapping, twisting, turning, torsing abnormally between each other in all of the different motions of the neck. Only 2 in the last 10 years that haven't had abnormalities in that area. So you have this. How much it's affecting you, you don't know, because remember that frog that didn't jump out of the water because the water was heated up so slowly? that's the changes that happen in the neurologic posture, function, alignments, neuromuscular control patterns over decades. And we just don't know any different until, you know, like the really bad stuff starts to happen. So as I was saying, headaches, visual impairment, changes in voice, low blood pressure, digestive changes, elevation in your fight or flight nervous system, radiating pain in the upper neck, jaw. Okay. How many people out there haven't had some of that? So it comes and it goes, and it's usually associated with other things that are happening at the same time. And if you avoid the bad diet, the bad sleep, the extra stress, not exercising, generally you're not symptomatic because your neurologic system is accommodating for things. But when they're severe, or they've occurred over a long period of time, these more complex symptoms can occur. Length of time and severity of injury are correlated with the complexity of the symptoms, typically. Okay, what then? This is run-of-the-mill craniocervical instability that I'm describing to you. What then is floxy neck? As I said, everybody's had this stuff happen, frequency of injury. No, this is a problem. This really is the wrong version of this. So what's specific about floxy neck compared to the population? Okay, remember, we have problems with collagen because of all the mechanisms that we talked about. Remember that we have problems with neurologic function that we already talked about. Guess what two things keep you from having symptoms of craniocervical instability? Your collagen, because that's holding you together, and your neurologic system. And if your neurologic system is dysfunctioning at the same time that you're losing collagen, you're not able to accommodate for the abnormalities that are occurring and being received through the baroreceptors and proprioceptive function of the upper cervical spine. So you go from an accommodated abnormal state to suddenly not being able to accommodate for that state anymore. So you quickly go from abnormal accommodated to abnormal symptomatic. Usually that takes years or decades to happen. Now, I'm not sure of this, of course, because I couldn't necessarily put, I couldn't actually do a study on this because it doesn't really exist to be able to do this because everybody's injured, but what percentage of symptoms of fluoroquinolone toxicity are actually coming from upper cervical instability with its sympathetic dysfunction, and how much is coming from all of the other damage? I don't know. I can tell you that at this point, I would say those two are accounting for probably 50% of the symptoms. And that's a guesstimate. But at the end of the day, there's no way to know this for sure. I did have, interestingly, a patient track my outcomes for me, a fluoroquinolone toxicity patient, and she came back and said, your patients do much better if you work on the neck compared to if you work on the low back and legs, regardless of where their symptoms are. I thought that was really amazing that She spent that time to do that. She said about twice better. Never had anybody follow my outcomes for me. So I appreciated her doing that because it followed everything else that I was doing in the body. Meaning people who come up with, just discs in the low back and they want me to do regenerative treatments with them. I tell them straight out, we need to look at and work on your upper neck if that's a problem. Now, it's up to them whether or not they want to do that. I'm not going to tell somebody they have to. But I will tell them that that's been my experience, that that is where the most significant outcomes come from when it's coming from the upper neck, and that's the driver. Okay, the injections are not simple. Like I said, there's only a half dozen of us that have hundreds of cases that we've worked on. Both ultrasound and fluoroscopy, in my opinion, have to be used for the injections. There are a fair number of those 6 that are only using fluoroscopy, and they're guessing where things like your vertebral artery are located. That's like a third of your brain's blood supply. I would not entrust my neck to that individual. I don't want anybody guessing at this level. So unique combinations of the regional injection therapies, capsules, joints, ligament, tendon, fascia are really advanced. Really advanced. I'll give you one slide on that. It takes me about 2 hours to go through a neck really, really carefully. So all these kind of enigmatic conditions that nobody likes to treat have an upper cervical instability component to them. So I treat each of these ones up here differently because they're all different. So the other piece of this is when you get all the baroreceptors and the proprioception telling you your neck is unstable in the upper part, your fight or flight nervous system comes in and neuromuscularly controls for the deep structure instability. That's the capsules, ligaments, and joints. Unfortunately, the neuromuscular adaptations are never as powerful as the tendons, ligaments, joints. And you can't ever have the same kind of stability from the muscular system that you have from your deep stabilizing system. So when that fight or flight nervous system goes off to protect all that area, it affects the whole body. It affects the brain, particularly because of the location. And now we have a better understanding why people who have cervical instability don't do as well with sympathetic reset with the stellate ganglion block as they do if they have a more stable neck. So unstable neck with sympathetic dysfunction directly affects emotion. Remember, the fight or flight nervous system in the body and the brain are very connected. They have similar spectra of abnormalities. So when you do the stellate ganglion block and somebody's got an unstable neck, I just tell them these 2 things are fighting against each other all of the time, and you may need to redo this unless you want to go forward with doing the neck together with the stellate ganglion block. I don't like doing unnecessary procedures or procedures that are likely to fail in the future on people. And individuals who have cervical instability and PTSD, I don't like to just do the PTSD work on them. Of course, it's their body, and I'll let them know what their options are. So this is now validated for PTSD and complex regional pain syndrome. You have to do this under ultrasound. There are at least 4 or 5 different branches of the stellate ganglion that I work on individually with the ganglion itself. And you can't do that under X-ray guidance. You can't see the tissue that you're injecting. And as I talked about, there's a tailor-made concoction that I've put together for fluoroquinolone toxicity for this block. Here's the other stuff, let's say, that I do together with the main regenerative injections. When I say main, I mean the ones that are up top, the upper cervical segments. Those aren't the only things to work on. The medial and lateral cervical ligaments in the upper spine, very, very, very carefully done. You have a couple of nerves, couple of blood vessels going through that area, but especially for Ehlers-Danlos syndrome and fluoroquinolone toxicity, I am the only one that does that. And just so you know, that's not a beat my chest kind of thing to say I'm the only one that does that. The guys in Colorado are the only ones that go through the back of the throat to inject the alar ligament. And it's not an enviable thing in medicine to be the only one doing something. You are generally looked at as a heretic and a crazy, and you're unvalidated, and you are, way outside of norm to be doing things that nobody else is doing, regardless of how well they might work. So besides all that, the occipital nerves, the greater and lesser occipital nerves are oftentimes adhesed in their fascial planes. The ligamentum flavum is the ligament that's immediately behind the spinal cord. You have to have ultrasound and fluoroscopy to be able to inject that very carefully. The brachial plexus sometimes is all stuck in its fascial planes. Very complex to be able to inject around the brachial plexus. Atlanto-occipital membrane, critical little bridge is what Dr. Clary calls this. It's a very unique structure. It goes from the head to the C2 spinous process. Let's see, this structure right here. And it has connections that go down to the lining around the spinal cord and brain. So the amount of proprioception that's in that single structure is incredible. And being able to work that tissue appropriately down to the roots of it as much as you can. Extremely complicated injections to do. And then both sides of the clavicle have big implications for what's happening in the neck. A lot of neuromuscular connections to the whole clavicle, and the AC joint, which is the little joint that gets separated in shoulder separations, has huge connections to the upper cervical spine via the trapezius. And both sides of the clavicle need to be worked. The temporomandibular joints need to be worked, and the first and second rib joints need to be worked. This is the set of procedures that Ehlers-Danlos, and even more Ehlers-Danlos with fluoroquinolone toxicity, taught me to do. This is what I call the regional approach to care for the upper cervical spine, because you could get into just those upper joints and do some good. Treating regionally more important, especially in Ehlers-Danlos syndrome and fluoroquinolone toxicity, because all the tissue is affected. Okay, that's a really complex slide. Has anybody heard that fluoride causes neurologic injuries? I'm going to cover that in the weekly podcast. Heather Slusher just put something out on that in the FAHA Facebook group. I think this is probably the thing that's widely known. So it's a known fact. We're going to cover all of the medications that are fluoridated, and it's one of the few things that's widely known in the fluoroquinolone community that fluoride is bad for you. So we'll cover that in its own talk. Okay, again, that's going to either wake you up or make you crazy, one of the two. Now, that list should look a lot like the list for collagen injuries that I gave you, because it's the exact same list. For the neurologic system to heal, you have the exact same factors as you do the collagen ones. Now, you've already seen that list, so I'm going to give you the couple extra there, a little more specific to the neurologic system. Central nervous system function, nerve root compression. 6 levels of the neurologic system that we discussed, and the order of healing, understanding that timing, energy, motion, compression may be more important than the symptoms in the nerves themselves. Because it might not be an intrinsic nerve problem that you're dealing with. It might be, but it's unlikely to be the only thing that you're dealing with. So not treating all of these things in the order of healing section and hoping that something like IVIG is going to cure your nerves is sort of like throwing a Hail Mary. It's one piece of one part of the equation. And though people may become less symptomatic with it, it's certainly not dealing with all of the levels of dysfunction that exist in the neurologic system to cause peripheral neuropathy. All right. I'm gonna end the neurologic section there. We'll have some time for some more questions. All right, guys, go ahead. What do you have? What are your questions about for the neurologic system?
Most of us find that low carb diets are a big factor in helping, or vice versa. You know, introduction of carbs, reintroduction of carbs will flare neuropathy as quickly or more as any other issues. And I'm just wondering what the relationship is there.
Especially refined carbohydrates and/or carbohydrates that have glyphosate in them. I mean, the glyphosate piece of it can be, neuropathic causing in and of itself, as well as extremely decimating to the gut. So a lot of that could be boiled down to what is the immune system doing in response to all of those carbs? And that immune system effect then on the neurologic system is really critical. When you get really far down that pathway, then you're getting things like diabetes, and that's fairly significant higher occurrence rate in the fluoroquinolone community due to the hepatic dysfunctions and the gut biome dysfunctions. So that's all chemistry, mostly immune system mediated, but I could have probably done a slide or two on glyphosate effects on the neurologic system. I'll probably have that pop up somewhere in the weekly podcasts that I'm going to do.
Cool.
And that's why I like Carrie Collett in the group with us. She's been working with fluoroquinolone toxicity for 7 years. I don't know if there's another dietitian that's been doing it that long. And she does what's called the MRT and LEAP program. That's the mediator release test. It's a snapshot into how your immune system is reacting to 170 different foods and chemicals. And she builds a 4-month program to basically get the highly inflammatory, irritating foods out of the way. And this is all immunogenic inflammation. So immune system dysfunction, which is the biggest part of your chemistry of your body, is coming from what you're eating, or at least what you're putting in your mouth. This is one of the reasons why I'm a big advocate of supplements being taken every other day. Well, that's an odd concept, especially in this community. But I would even, pick a different magnesium supplement for every other day, so that you're not getting the same thing in your gut every single day. The only thing that you go in your mouth every day that's the same as water, because your immune system can become reactive to anything that you're taking in. And the more often you take it in, the more likely it's going to become reactive.
Okay, so I've definitely been spreading things out, but I'm taking supplements every day. Are you saying it should be day on, day off, or basically just don't be repeating the same ones over and over again and spread them all out? Like, because I'll get my I basically, for like oil, I get the krill oil one day, then I do the fish oil another day, then I do the cod liver oil another day, and then I go back to the krill oil and like the magnesiums. Well, the magnesium is pretty much the one that is pretty constant. But like I was saying earlier, I will take more of the citrate if I'm not flushing through the way I'd like to. But there's a variety of them that just like zinc. I just take it a couple times a week or whatever.
So there's kind of a phasic thing to this, Mark, for us anyway. When we're doing laboratory and other testing showing deficiencies, that's 1 to 2 months then of replenishing. And that stuff can be taken every day because your body really wants it. Over that same period of time, as we heal the abnormal inflammation and you're absorbing better, i.e. you don't need IVs, then once you're a couple months into it, then my suggestion for everybody is do your water soluble vitamins 3 days a week, your fat soluble 3 days a week, do them twice a day instead of once a day. So you're getting a bigger dose each of those days, but then you have a day off in between what you're taking, and then you're taking Sundays off completely. There's no supplement that needs to be in your body every single day. And the overuse, overcost, and frankly, the abnormal effects that can happen from taking supplements needs to be mitigated. It needs to be pulled back a bit because we're trying to force nutrients into a person oftentimes who can't even absorb them.
Yeah, one thing I don't remember what doctor it was, but they said it's basically everything you take that isn't something you really need is something your body will have to work and expend energy and expend other valuable resources to process and move along and remove out of the system. So people, oh yeah, well, it's harmless, it's something good and I'll just take a little more of it just in case or whatever. And it's like, well, that's not really how it works.
Yeah, and I don't know if anyone else has this feeling, but I get kind of like a gut, like, I don't want to take that sense when I'm overloading on a supplement. It's like I'm like, ugh.
No, I definitely feel that.
Yeah,
Definitely felt that.
and that's the basis for like even doing your own applied kinesiology. See how you muscle test, and then hold something in your hand and see how you muscle test. The quantum energetic effects of something else on us that's real. That sounds a little crazy probably to have a MD talk about applied kinesiology, but I don't care. What works. The neurologic system is the most challenging part of the Newtonian part of healing. That's cellular up to actual structures that you can see with your eyes. There are so many different feedback loops, so many different ways that it can be irritated. It's just tweaky. And finding your formula for what works and what doesn't work might take a really long time. And it's going to change over time. I developed those thought patterns from having epilepsy for 20 years. I'd find my formula that kept me from having seizures, and then things would change. And it's not a nerve damage situation that I was dealing with, but it was still a tweaky area in my neurologic system, and it's elegant and it's subtle and it's challenging. This is one of the reasons why I tell everybody this is going to teach you about you. What can you eat? What kind of stress can you take? How much can you not sleep? Can you drink or not drink? This is part of the reasons why I avoid having, like these global responses to any single person's questions and symptoms. I have this, what should I take? partly even if I knew exactly what that person needed to take, it sort of robs them of the process of learning how to respect their body, their neurologic system, their immune system. And even though it's hard and it's frustrating, and I know it is because I did it myself, it's really worth it to learn yourself at that level. And if this forces you to do that, yeah, it's okay to be kind of angry about it, because it's not very fun to be forced into something, especially when there's, just on the other side of it is pain and neuropathy and changes in mood and suicidality. And yeah, those are really hard things to deal with. Those are critical things to deal with. But it's worth it to subject yourself to the experiment of life and let yourself go down the process of learning what you can and can't do, can and can't feel, can and can't say, can and can't do, what kind of relationships you can have, what kind of stress you can have. This is going to shape you. It's going to be your governor. And again, it's not enjoyable a lot of times, but it's a hell of a ride. I will always be your cheerleader for doing that. And I just want to facilitate you guys through that process. It's your process. I'm just helping you through it.
Once you've made it through this, there's you're pretty much ready for just about anything else life can throw at you.
I appreciate your perspective, Mark. The people who have had it long enough oftentimes have developed those senses about it. And I would encourage everybody else with this. You don't have to struggle. It doesn't have to be something that's anger, resentment, bitterness. It can be, but it doesn't have to be. You can have joy through the entire process of the journey of learning yourself, your mind, your spirit, your capacities. One of the paintings I have on my wall says, everything is conspiring for your benefit. You realize that your life will be nothing short of amazing. That's hard. It's hard to develop that degree of a high road kind of belief system about your own existence. But that's what I'm going to encourage. Because, it's a heck of a lot better to be in pain and joyful than it is painful and to be in pain and bitter. All right, what's everybody else thinking in the back of their heads? Nerves are complex. Go ahead and throw it out there. We hit the 4-hour mark. You guys ready to be done for the day? Going once, going twice.
I just wanted to ask, is this recording going to be shared somewhere?
Yeah, it'll be on the Regenerative Masters YouTube channel.
All right, thanks.
You're welcome. And there'll be segments for it. And then as I go into the more broadly, deeply, like highly specific work on each weekly podcast, I'll get those out there too, so that you can kind of see these. This is more of a general overview of everything, going into what is exactly happening at all the way from the quantum to the macro structural level. What's happening with each of the pieces of this equation, and how do you treat it, is what will be in that series of podcasts or webinars, whichever one you want to call it. So they'll all be out there. I figured I got to get my 15 years of doing this out there. Well, feel free to private message me if you want to, from either on the Faha page or Instant Messenger. Happy to take feedback. And I will plan on seeing you guys tomorrow at 9 o'clock.
Hope to see you then. Thank you kindly. Have a great evening.
All right, you too.